Hi there, I'm Rainn Wilson, and you have arrived at Share Our America, the Summit. This is being brought to you by Weave, the Social Fabric Project, and the 92nd Street Y. And just know that you're watching today alongside thousands of people from across our country who care about our nation. You're here because, like me, we believe that our future can be brighter and that Americans can come together again. I mean, sure, hey, we complain and we criticize. This is America, after all, where everyone knows what's best for everyone else. But we Americans also have a long history of getting things done and making things happen, finding our way, united through some perilous times. So many of us are worried that America is coming apart at the seams. A record high 80% of adults told the Gallup poll that they believe that Americans are greatly divided on our most important values. Yet at the same time, a majority of us say we want to connect with people who are different than us. 66% say that we believe that we can learn something valuable in doing that. Now, I don't want to gloss over the fact that we are dealing with a lot right now. And believe me, it's not just our politics. The mental health epidemic is deadly and pervasive. Many of us are feeling isolated. Surveys show that from a quarter to a half of Americans report being lonely. The Surgeon General pointed out this is a loneliness epidemic. Almost 1 in 5 Americans say they don't feel part of this country. There's this uncertainty about the job market with changing technology. Many worry about what education looks like in their kids' schools and whether they have enough money saved for emergencies or retirement. Many folks feel misunderstood, stereotyped, canceled. And it's not just about politics. It's about all kinds of things: income, faith, ethnic backgrounds, education, whether we live in cities or towns, and on the coasts or on a farm in the middle of the country. Yet, everywhere I look, I see something else, things that inspire and offer hope. Personally, I do a lot of speaking on college campuses, and as troubled as Gen Z might be, I also see optimistic young people questioning old toxic ways of doing things and coming together in a unique fashion, centering service and the arts and spirituality in what they do. A quiet revolution has been happening, away from the headlines and the social media rants. People are showing up for their neighbors and fellow Americans outside of politics, faith, and race, because people want to trust their neighbors. They don't want to have to censor themselves. They don't want to have to worry about politics and hot-button issues dividing families or shutting down conversations. So we're going to be joined in this summit by inspiring people from all across the country. We've got some leading thinkers who will tell us how we got to this current crisis of community and connection and how we can get out of it. We are joined by people who gave up complaining in order to get involved in the towns and cities where they live. We've got a woman who felt run out of her Appalachian town because she was different, but returned and now runs a bar on Main Street where people of all types mix. We've got a pastor turned librarian who helped turn a 130-year-old library in Memphis into a bustling community hub. And a reverend spreading the gospel of connection with food. We're going to hear from parents who want a country where you can ask your neighbors for help when you need it. All over, Americans are uniting again to build communities where relationships thrive, neighbors trust one another, and people work together so that they can live together well. Now, my personal vision for the country is lodged in its founding motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. We've never come close to hitting that ideal. And racism, as well as partisan division, has kept us far away from it. But, our founding fathers were really onto something with that amazing goal shining in the distance. So let's start by looking at how our country became so divided and how much of that division is hyped by those who actually want to divide us. Grab your coffee, grab a snack, settle in, drop your assumptions for the moment. It's time to start weaving a strong new social fabric for America.
Welcome, everyone, to Share Our America. I'm Michael McCarter, the opinion editor for Gannett and the USA Today Network, the largest news publisher in the nation. Our portfolio includes USA Today and over 200 local media outlets across the country. We're pleased to serve as the media sponsor for this summit, and a big thanks to Rainn Wilson for hosting. I'm especially excited to moderate this panel discussion on how we can unite communities and curb divisiveness. I'd like to welcome Rodolfo Mendoza Denton, a professor of psychology at the University of California, Berkeley. He received a BA from Yale University and his PhD from Columbia University. Niobe Way is a professor of developmental psychology at NYU. She received her BA from UC Berkeley and her doctoral degree from Harvard. Loretta is an activist, professor, and public intellectual in the human rights movement. She received her BA from Agnes Scott College and her doctoral degree from Emory University. Rodolfo, Niobe, Loretta, thank you for joining me. My first question to this group is, what do you see are the most significant factors contributing to the current sense of division and disconnection in American society? Loretta Ross, I'd like to start with you.
Well, I see the most significant contributor is the fact that a lot of people are in pain. And when they're in pain, they don't necessarily think rationally. Everybody's hurt hurts. And even though we may not agree on the sources of the pain, for the people themselves, it's very real. And so that causes them to seek for false solutions for what's hurting them. It causes them to sometimes turn to hate because they think they can identify a source of that pain. And so this is a very traumatized society that we're dealing with. And compounding that, people have individual trauma to deal with. And so I think that's the source. Until we take people's suffering seriously and address the real causes of economic, cultural, political pain, we will not heal our society.
Thank you for that. Rodolfo, what is your take on this?
I think just as Dr. Ross said, there is a lot of pain. What I see is that there's a lot of pain that arises from a feeling of threat and uncertainty. And we do know from years and years of research that when you have that combination of threat and uncertainty, people look to resolve that uncertainty by trying to find others like them that they can essentially, circle the forces around. And so people are looking for ways to identify with in groups, which necessarily leads to out groups and leaving other people out. So it's a particularly difficult combination that I think is the result both of the pandemic, but also of uncertainty around where we are going as a nation and as a planet.
And Niobe, where do you see the disconnection?
So what boys and young men reveal to us, and so everything I say always comes out of what I've learned from young people, because we're also not listening to young people. So if we listen to young people, we'd actually understand ourselves a little bit more and also how to heal. And they reveal the fact that we are naturally social. We know that from social neuroscience. We know that from developmental psychology. Boys tell us that they're starving for friendships. They're starving for deep connection. And they grow up in a culture that doesn't value connection, doesn't value our capacity to care and connect and cooperate. It's deeply antisocial. And what boys reveal about the antisocial nature is it's the hierarchies embedded in modern culture that they're most troubled with. Because they feel in the case of the hierarchy of humans, where some humans are considered more human than others, more deserving of care, that they've been put on the bottom of the hierarchy and they're trying to get on top of the hierarchy. And the other hierarchy that boys and young men explicitly critique repeatedly again and again and again, and we don't listen to them, is the hard over the soft. We privilege everything. We stereotype as masculine over everything. We stereotype as feminine, when in fact, masculine and feminine, it's not masculine and feminine, it's just human to think and feel. It's human to want autonomy and connection, but we give it gender identities. And then we've created this massive gender wars going on between men and women, which in fact, boys and young men are teaching us to actually value our whole humanity, our hard and soft part, and thus better able to see that all humans are equally human.
What are the psychological and emotional consequences long term of living in a fragmented society? What do you see as the long term outcome of this?
It creates a disconnection from the self and other, which then leads to, in many cases, hell, right, in terms of outcomes. And then the question would be, which we can all talk about, is how do you foster resistance to that dehumanization? How do you foster resistance to dehumanization in young people so they can hold on to their gorgeous, gorgeous 5-year-old self that looks at each other with wonder and curiosity rather than, let me tell you something about me rather than what I can learn from you. And that to me is a natural instinct, but we've squished it in young people. So it's just all about me.
Dr. Ross, what's your take?
I've made a career of talking to very improbable people who I wouldn't necessarily want to call my BFFs. I mean, teaching feminism to rapists when I was a rape survivor, or deprogramming white supremacists. These are not people that I wanted to bring into my inner circle, but I found it necessary to keep sight of their humanity while I helped them change their behaviors. And so I agree with the concept of a hierarchy. And of course, that's the structural system in which we're slotted, in which we're born in. But even within that, we have choices. I choose not to be a victim, even though I'm a rape survivor. I I choose not to be an oppressor. You have choices within that, and there's no excuse for people to do that. But the point about alienation is very severe. In all the problematic people I've ever dealt with, they did not have a sense of belonging. They felt very alienated. And for many of them, it was their sense of belonging that they prioritized over a lot of other values. And so that's why were able to be manipulated into doing criminal activities or self-destructive activities, all of those things. And so, yes, it can start young, but I think everyone can learn how to find inner peace by getting in touch with their integrity and developing healthier relationships, learning to manage their emotions. There are things that are teachable at every age.
Dr. Mendoza Denton, your take on that question?
Let me just say, Dr. Ross, I'm really inspired by what you say, and if I may, what you teach. And I personally am looking for that grace, that to be able to see the humanity in other people. The Michael, there's an old finding that's, I think, feels very true. That when resources are scarce, and this sort of has the flavors of threat, etc. Right? When resources are scarce, when people are under threat, that's when you're most likely to have intergroup hostility, because people are looking for safety, etc. But it turns out that the that potential of hostility, given a lack of resources, usually needs someone to frame it as a us versus them, as a this group on top versus the other. And that's really important, because it suggests that the power of people who have the megaphone, or people who have the attention of many other people, to direct the way that the conversation is going. And oftentimes in the most bitter political situations, it happens to be people who then turn that threat into scapegoating other people. As humans, I it, it we are always, I think, looking for validation of the way in which we disambiguate what is an infinitely interpretable world. And so that's why when someone is at a party doing something that we feel maybe socially unacceptable or odd, you'll see people kind of looking at each other, and that silent glance is telling you, do you see what I see? Right? People are looking for that, for that confirmation that what they see, what they are experiencing, is in fact not just them. Right? Then when you get leaders who then say, well, let me tell you how it is, right? It's because these people are bad, or this is the way to move forward. That provides, as Dr. Ross is saying, a way forward, a validation, a way to belong somewhere. And when you don't have other voices, in a lonely world, that's the recipe, I think, for further balkanization. On the other hand, if you get people, and I'm sorry to put you in this position, Dr. Ross, but people who then have another perspective, right, which is like, despite the danger, despite the threat, you can move forward and try to establish connections or understanding. You can begin to build communities around that.
How do we unite rather than divide our communities? And because I love people that have takeaways from any presentations that I'm a part of, you all have shared some great insights. What practical steps can individuals take to bridge the divides in their own communities? And I'd like to start with you, Dr. Ross.
Well, I have studied the call out culture for the last 10 years, and I've written a book called Calling In: How to Start Making Change with Those You'd Rather Cancel, because I want to know, how do we build a healthier society with people we'd rather not have to even talk to? That to me is our teachable techniques that we all can learn and we can share. First of all, I think it starts by calling in yourself, calling in your tendency towards outrage and performativity when somebody does something that gets on your nerves. That's an conflict is inevitable, but you don't have to use it as a way of establishing a platform, getting famous, humiliating people. Again, all of those are choices. And so I think it's very possible to have very hard conversations with people you didn't think you needed to even talk to, and you will be surprised by the results of that. I know I'm always awed by what I learned from someone who only watches Fox News. I still learn something every time. And so we have to humble ourselves to get to that by embracing the calling in culture.
Dr. Mendoza Denton, your thoughts?
As I think about the work that I've done on cross-race friendships, one of the insights that we rely on is uh, uh, an insight of finding commonalities. And even something as simple as, wearing the same jacket, or, oh my gosh, I have the same picture frame as you, Michael, in the background, for example. Those can be small and insignificant cues that help you feel a little bit of connection to the other person, and maybe a way to help us bridge those seemingly intractable divides. Now, it doesn't take the place of putting one's spirit in a place where you're able to hear things that you may just want to cancel out, as you say, Dr. Ross. And I think that takes a lot of internal work to not try to convince someone of your point of view, which is another way of trying to put yourself on top, but rather of learning something, as Dr. Way is saying, of that wonder. I remember having a lovely conversation with Dr. Arlie Hochschild, um, who's written uh, who's written extensively about Trump supporters. And I asked, I was like, how do you interview folks when they say things that just go deeply against the grain of what you believe in? And I remember her saying, you turn off the alarm system. that otherwise that leads to that, to that outrage and to that, as Dr. Ross says, that performativity almost of that then stands in the way of, finding commonalities of learning something and helping, everybody grow. So commonalities, and starting small, and going from there.
Dr. Way?
So we've been doing something called the Listening with Curiosity Project in public schools in New York City for about a decade now. And we built a curriculum around it. And we're now in universities. I do it at NYU Abu Dhabi as well. And it's learning the practices. I tell you, I'm going to go back to 5-year-olds. I'm a big obsessor of 5-year-olds. It's learning the practice of listening like a 5-year-old, which is that you're not listening to judge or to be right or to see if they agree with you. You're listening to learn something about the answer to your question or something about them. And Toni Morrison says this too, not just about them, but about you. Because when someone talks about their experience, you learn about yourself. Because ultimately you're comparing yourself, similarities and differences. So we've done this practice, and we found in our research, it has huge impact on not only social emotional well-being, but this is the critical variable, common humanity. Kids, after going through this, they begin to see kids that are different from in the classroom as more similar to them than they did at the beginning we integrate it into English and literature classes. Because once you start listening with curiosity, you can no longer stereotype someone. When you start saying, where is home for you? Where do you belong? When have you felt listened to? When have you not felt listened to? I have my NYU students interview them. Every class I do, I have them turn to the partner, interview each other about a meaningful question that they have. They're starving to be asked questions, and they're starving to be answered meaningful questions. And once you ask a real question and you really listen and you ask follow-up questions to get at their meaning making, you can no longer stereotype them. But the starting point is listening with curiosity, listening to learn, not just about another person, but about yourself. And then once you do that, this is what Toni Morrison said, you see yourself in the other. And once you see yourself in the other, a relationship can happen, because then you can see the similarities. But this is the big kicker. You can see the differences even if you disagree, once you see the similarities, right? So it opens up a possibility to disagree, but to still actually have a friendship, because it doesn't have to be having the same point. Yeah, go ahead.
I agree and disagree with the significant point of what you're saying. Part of our problem and part of the reinforcement of hierarchy is the belief, unless I see myself in the other person, I can't relate. Okay, and
Yeah,
so
fair enough. No, fair enough.
so that really doesn't go as far as we think it should go,
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
because it's still placed in yourself as the center, and you're defining everybody else in relationship to you when they deserve to be defined in relationship to themselves. And 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 so we're not deconstructing the hierarchy as much as we think we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we only put it in relational terms. I have to care
Yeah.
I have to care about bombs dropping in Yemen if I never meet a Yemeni in my life, because my integrity demands it, not whether or not I've been to Yemen and I've known people there.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally makes sense.
yeah, if you're going to move to an abundance framework instead of a scarcity one, we have to throw all of this stuff out of the window and start all over, because we're secretly reinforcing what we really want to get rid of. I'll just say that.
Well, we are coming up on time, so I would like to ask you all one final question. And that question, because you're doing such significant work on this subject matter, what gives you hope that we can overcome this crisis of connection? And I'd like to start with you, Dr. Mendoza Denton.
What gives me hope is our ability to change and learn, and to find voices that lead us in a different path from the ideological and moralistic ruts that we are in. So, just as we have the power to alienate others, we also have the power and ability to be inclusive. It, I think we have to acknowledge that it takes hard work, and that it's uncomfortable, and but we all we can do is try to get better. The Through the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, we have a program on bridging differences, and a very important lesson that we have learned there is that bridging is not the same as debating. It's not the same as trying to convince other people of your point of view, but rather really um, not only coming to see one another's point of view, but also, and I think that Dr. Ross put this beautifully, as seeing other people in their own terms, in terms of who they are, rather than relative to oneself, and one's own morals or values. So I think that there's a way forward, because there are people out there who have expertise in this domain. So I would start by reading Dr. Ross's book.
Awesome. Dr. Ross, that was a great segue to you.
Well, I should add that I teach all of this stuff online for $5 a lesson. So anybody that wants to come and learn about calling in techniques, feel free. You can find me easily. But what gives me hope is the fact that in the civil rights movement, and I live in Atlanta, I'm just up here, so hi, Atlanta. But what gives me hope is remembering that in the civil rights movement, they talked about the chain of freedom. And the chain of freedom stretches back towards our ancestors and forward towards our descendants. And so my mission is to make sure that the chain doesn't break at my link. But the hope is derived from the fact that I am part of a chain, that is not all dependent on me getting everything right, saying the right words, knowing enough, being enough, none of that. I can really, really mess up and still be part of the chain of freedom. And so I love the hope that the ancestors, and I'm a great grandmother, so I actually know my descendants, you know, that they give me. And the fact that I think, I don't know what else to say except I love this historical moment that I'm in right now.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Way.
So I would say the first thing that it's the people have a hard time hearing that we learn from young people is it's a cultural problem. It's not an individual or it's not only an individual group problem. It's a cultural problem. It's the waters in which we raise our children, and is fundamentally antisocial. So we can change the culture, and the reason I know we can change the culture is we change the culture all the time. So we went from Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden to back to Trump. We're changing the culture all the time. And the second thing I'm hopeful for is young people. I've been talking to young people, listening to the way they construct the world since 1987. That's almost 40 years. They see the problem, they see the solution, they know what to do to create a more just and humane world. And if we listen to them a little bit closer and we understand what they're teaching us about who we are fundamentally, we would learn that we already naturally have the skills within us to solve our own problems. It's natural to us. It's natural to listen with curiosity. That's a natural capacity. It's natural to be curious about another person and to actually wonder what their lives and experiences are. So listening to young people, I mean, it sounds again a little bit surfacey, but it's really not. It's really listening closely to what they're telling us is the problem and the solution, and then using our natural skills to begin to disrupt that hierarchy that has to be disrupted to create a culture that cares, is cooperative, and is curious about each other. We're not even curious about each other. We just talk about ourselves. So if we go back to what we have in our natural skills, we can create a caring and just and humane society. And so the hope is in young people that are going to start to even more insist on it because of what's happening now. They're going to become louder in their determination to create a more connected world. And that makes me incredibly hopeful.
Well, thank you. And Dr. Loretta Ross, Dr. Niobe Way, Dr. Rodolfo Mendoza Denton, I want to thank you sincerely for sharing your expertise today. Gaining insight and better understanding can help us move forward collectively as a nation and as individuals in our own lives and communities. It's important to remember that often what unites us is stronger than what divides us. Next up, you'll hear from David Brooks and leaders who work and do stories that are grounded in communities across the country, showing how we can really start to take action from where we are right now. Thank you for joining us today.
I go into the event feeling nervous, and then there was so much vulnerability in that space, and I walked away feeling wonderful.
I saw people coming out of their shells, and myself as well.
I was riveted by the opportunity from the very beginning.
Conversation is about questions, and conversation is about just opening yourself up to hearing what the other person has to say at the same time while you're saying what you need to say.
Our differences are not something to be feared.
Somebody else is going through the same thing. We don't know all the answers, but together we can come up with an answer.
This is one small area, one small group, but that's all you need to make change.
Hello, everybody. My name is David Brooks. I'm a New York Times columnist and chair of something called Weave, the Social Fabric Project at the Aspen Institute, which supports people who are building trust around the country. And I am the physical and emotional embodiment of the United States of America right now. I'm under the weather and sick, so I feel like I've been run over by several trucks. But that's the state of the nation these days. And if you want a little pick-me-up, you and I have come to the right place with Jen Bailey, Rich Harwood, and Michael Smith. I think the first session of this conference was about what's wrong with America. And this time we're going to talk about what's right with America. And I'm with three people who are leading that turnaround, leading that rightness. And we're really just going to talk about what they do, how they see the country, how they see their mission within the country. And so, Michael, we'll start with you. You've been involved with, especially with youth organizations, the Obama Foundation, the Boys and Girls Clubs, My Brother's Keeper. And so these are all some of the most promising organizations in the country. How do you think about your role right now?
David, thank you for the question. It's good to see you. Rich, Jen, good to be with you as well. You know, it's interesting at times like this. It's a reminder that Washington does not rule the nation. Washington doesn't have all of the solutions. Certainly, Washington doesn't have all of the problems. And so when I think about my career and I think about the work that I've done, it's about building capacity in local communities. It's about engaging in the ground and taking solutions that work and making them work for more people. So at this moment in time of great challenge, I think about the thousands of AmeriCorps members and AmeriCorps senior volunteers that I've met across this country who, after hurricanes, fires, and floods, many of them lost their own homes and decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to serve. I think about elders during the pandemic who were working as our foster grandparents in the schools, and their principals told them to go home. And they said, I'm not leaving my babies. And so I'm going to teach myself how to use an iPad, and I'm going to keep teaching my students. I think about young people who were feeling overwhelmed by climate change and climate anxiety and didn't know what to do. And they said, you know what? I'm going to do something about it. So I'm going to join one of these conservation corps or youth corps across the country. And so I think about the resilience of the American people. I think about this beautiful American spirit where neighbors help neighbors. They don't wait for the government. And that through challenge, it's going to be people, neighbors with neighbors that are going to continue doing the work that matters to create unity, to create hope, to create possibility in the country, no matter what's happening in limited spaces, maybe in a little city just a couple miles away from me.
Now, would you say that the folks you're talking about, are they more energized, more dispirited, both over the last few months, or?
I have to say this past couple months have been really challenging. I took over AmeriCorps after the pandemic, and what was really interesting is we saw a spike of people during the pandemic who wanted to serve. When the economy started going strong and there was lots of competition, we saw a little dip, but that came right back up. Actually, we run something called the volunteering, AmeriCorps did when I used to run it with the Census Bureau, something called the Volunteering and Civic Life in America Research. And we found during the pandemic, for the first time ever, a 7% drop in the number of people that say they volunteer formally with a nonprofit organization. The number of people that say they volunteer informally stayed the same. I was so happy to report just a couple months before I left last fall to show that that gap had been erased and people are back. And we were seeing that at programs across the country. If you talk to the CEOs of Boys and Girls Clubs and Salvation Army and Habitat for Humanity, they will tell you that folks are back. So there is excitement. People during times of challenge, we see this after 9/11, after Hurricane Katrina. People want to jump in. They want to get their hands dirty instead of getting lost in a sea of despair, as Congressman John Lewis said.
Now, Jen, you started the People's Supper, I don't know how many years ago. It's been at least several years since you started that to bring people together. And you and I were on a call during COVID. I'm recalling seeing you, and seeing you when you were pregnant. Now you have kids of 4 and 2, so congratulations on that. How do you, when I think about COVID, I think about what's happening now. That's a lot of bumps in the road. How do you see your work, and how has it changed with these various crises that we faced?
Sure. Thank you. It's so good to be with you, David, and so good to be with you all, both here and virtually, as folks are joining us. Oh, man. Times have changed, both in my personal life and I think for all of us over the past several years. And yet, I think some things remain the same. When I think about this concept of trust, one that has been really deeply connected to both our work at the People's Supper and at the core of my work through Faith Matters Network, and now as the executive director of the Dan and Margaret Maddox Fund in Nashville, Tennessee, one of the mantras of our work through the People's Supper, which was a project that was founded way back in 2017 as an effort called 100 Days, 100 Dinners. Our hope was during that time, over the first 100 days of the first Trump administration, noticing how toxic the rhetoric was in the 2016 election cycle. Our goal during that first 100 days was to bring people together across lines of difference to share a meal with one another. And one of the mantras from that People's Supper built on a quote by Stephen Covey that relationships move at the speed of trust, but social change moves at the speed of relationships, is what we would say. And so when I think about this notion of trust, what I think about is actually my friend Lennon Flowers. Lennon is one of the co-founders of the People's Supper with me. And when I think about the foundations of trust that we built, it started with friendship and conditions of friendship. Now, Lennon and I became friends because we found ourselves invited to the same retreat, meditating in the desert. And we both locked eyes as a quote unquote wise sage was talking, and we rolled our eyes at the same time. And what I didn't know is that in that eye roll became the foundations for what would be one of the most important sister friendships of my life. And so as I think about what we're facing today around sort of suspicion and a lack of trust, I'm really interested in the question of what does it mean for us to first cultivate conditions where friendship can thrive, where we can see one another and build relationships with one another, not necessarily based even on a common goal, but on shared interest, on a shared framework, on having 2 young children, right? These are examples, I think, that when we want to build trust, creating conditions where friendships can thrive, where the opportunity is presented for people to connect, not just about what's in the headlines, but what matters most at the core of their lives and how they organize their lives, is the first step as we think about the sort of broader societal change that we want to see in this moment. And so I'm ever so grateful that I rolled my eyes at the same time as Lennon, because it would form the bedrock of a friendship that saw me through the death of my mother for cancer. Lennon had also experienced the death of her mother from cancer in her early 20s. We now both have 2 babies. They're under 5, right? All of these like tiny steps and major milestones in our life we've now accompanied together, and I feel so grateful for that.
Jen, you've given me a new social role. I'm the kind of speaker who causes people to roll their eyes. I'm seeing that I am creating friendships. This is a new purpose that I have in my life.
You're doing the Lord's work, David. You didn't even know it.
Yeah. How do you think about the move from friendship to trust? Because friendship, as you say, like the Stephen Covey line, it does move slowly, and social trust is a big, broad social phenomenon. How do you leap from friendship to thinking about trust in a community, trust in an organization, even trust in a nation?
Sure. I mean, I think that those small acts of friendship begin to build bonds, right? And those bonds allow people to know over time, if you show up time and time again for your friend, right? Whether it be when a child is screaming and they need someone to pick them up, pick that child up while you're having to cook dinner, whether it be I think about Miss Donna, my next door neighbor, who's my kid's favorite person because she always keeps Tootsie Pops available for them. And so one of Celia Pearl, my 2-year-old's first words was Dunna. And she always like hops out of the car and runs over to get a Tootsie Pop from Miss Donna's house next door, right? And when my husband had an emergency appendectomy surgery, right, it was Miss Donna that I called to sit with the kids, right? So over time, those bonds can solidify and model for us what trust looks like. And I think those exchanges, if they form the very bedrock of how we understand relationality, can then start to emanate out. But I do think that it requires a certain level of risk and courage in this season when we are so isolated and when we are bombarded with messages that the last thing that we can do is trust one another. The last thing that we can do is trust, especially friendships with people who are not similar to us, right? And so in addition to cultivating conditions for friendship, I'm interested in how we can cultivate conditions for inner courage within our inner life, to take those risks, to step out there, to be vulnerable enough to say you need help. Those are skills that I think we've lost over time because we've been taught that we need to be fiercely independent, right? Certainly an image that I've lived with all my life is the one of the strong Black woman. Well, I lived and loved and have come from a line of strong Black women, and I know that internalized stress that they had took them to early graves in some cases. And so I am making the choice to live my life differently. And I'm sure, you don't have to be a Black woman to have experienced that myth of the sort of solitary, very strong, independent American, right? Right. It runs counter to what we know helps us thrive and survive in our lives. And so I guess my push to folks is, how can we cultivate the vulnerability and courage to know when we need to ask for help and to lean on people we consider friends to be able to help us weave together the gaps in our lives so that we can live and thrive.
Yeah. Rich, Jen just described a pretty powerful cultural force, the lionization of autonomy, either to be a strong Black woman or a repressed middle-aged white guy. And these things are just in our culture. And so you've been working in all 50 states, and you've written a book called The New Civic Path, really giving us an outline of a different way to think. So when you confront like big cultural forces like that have led to autonomy, individualism, isolation, how do you think about that kind of change that required to turn that around?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. It's good to be with you, Michael, and Jen. Good to be with you as well. What I think about is Reading, Pennsylvania. A number of years ago, we were asked to work with the community. About 10 or 12 years ago, it was in America. It was predominantly white at one point. It is now 70% Latino. So it's more diverse today than at any point before. As we all know, it was Reading was ground zero for the Latino vote in Pennsylvania during the 2024 presidential campaign. We were asked to work with the community on education issues a few years ago, and everyone said it would never work. It was at the height of the culture wars over education, as we all remember, around critical race theory, DEI, book banning, had the remnants of debates about kids wearing masks in school. And everyone said you'd never be able to pull the community together. The community would never be able to pull itself together under these conditions. And they did. They created a community-led, community-driven education agenda. And the reason is how and why. And they did it because they took these issues out of a political frame and put them in a frame of what matters to people around their shared aspirations. And they identified 9 areas. And out of that, they not only did that, but then scores and scores of people, David, came out from the community and said, we want to work on this together. And they formed 3 teams around early childhood education, English as a second language, early childhood education, after school and out of school activities. And in 2 short years, under the conditions that you and Jen were just talking about, and Michael, they've produced systemic transformational change. Now, what's interesting about this, to your point about the atomization of society, people going their own ways, people being unable to talk to one another, when I ask folks there, what are you creating together? They never talk to me about strategies, programs, and initiatives as important as those things are. Here's what they say. They say, we're creating new relationships. We're creating new bonds of trust. We're creating new ways. We once got together, now we're actually working together, being able to have the hard conversations we need to have. We're building together. We're not just talking, but we're creating, we're co-creating things together and producing things. We're producers again, and we've reclaimed our sense of agency. One woman said to me recently, I grew up here. I'm a native of Reading. And the narrative of this town has always been, you should flee it as fast as you possibly can. And she said, now the narrative of this town is, she said, I hear people talking about it who are coming into the town, is this is a great place to bring your kids. So Jen, you might want to bring your 4 and 2-year-old. This is a great place to bring your kids and raise your kids here. It's a great community. We're building a sense of pride and hope here. And so when I think of the challenges that we're facing nationally, what's clear to me is we don't need more divisive politics. We do need a new civic path forward. And I think it begins in our local communities.
Okay. Now I'm imagining somebody watching this who wants to do something like you guys have all done, which is to either create an organization or get active in their community or mobilize people. And when I look around people who have successfully done that, one of the things they do is they have a technology of convening, like a Last Supper. They have a dinner table, or they might have a bike club. And so there is some arena around which relationships are built. And the second thing they do is they identified shared loves. We love our park. We love our town. You mentioned Reading. I ran into a guy in Youngstown, Ohio, who just stood in the town square one day and said, defend Youngstown. He had a sign, defend Youngstown. And he loved his town. He loved Youngstown. And so if somebody came to each of you, and I'll start with you, Michael, and said, how do I start? What do I do? Is there advice you would give on the right way to begin to mobilize some local community?
I would say take the first step, make your bed, get out of bed, go ahead and start engaged. Begin to own. So many of us live in communities where we just kind of sleep there. We don't know the challenges. We don't know the opportunities. So get engaged, learn, talk to people, talk to your neighbors. And then if you see a challenge, don't wait for Bridgespan to come in and help you develop a 10-part theory of change. Just start doing the work, get involved, get into good trouble. And of course, as the former head of AmeriCorps, I have to say service is often the way when the challenges seem overwhelming. If you're worried about literacy, go tutor and mentor a kid. If you're worried about climate change, go work in that park cleanup. And what we found is, some people would say, oh, that's just nice. We need to work on systemic issues. Yes, we need to work on systemic issues. But not only does kind of episodic volunteering build a muscle, but it takes you on this path from charity to justice, where you start off maybe as a kid going with your mom to a food bank or going to a homeless shelter, and you're serving and you're helping, and then you learn about the challenge, and before you know it, you want to work on the root causes. And so I would say, if you're feeling overwhelmed, Gandhi said it best, if you want to find yourself, lose yourself in service. And there are so many ways now, whether that's Points of Light or AmeriCorps or idealist.org, there are so many ways that you can start to find a way to work on the challenges and opportunities in your community that you care about.
Okay. Jen, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but through Weave, I met one lady who said, I just practice aggressive friendship. And so that means she's the lady in the neighborhood who has people over for the Super Bowl party or whatever it is. And so aggressive friendship. There was another lady, I didn't meet her directly, but we met her through a friend of Weave's named, some of you may know, Trevian Shorters. And he ran into a lady in Florida, and she was helping elementary school kids cross the street so they wouldn't get hit by a car. And he asked her, do you have time to volunteer in your community? And she said, no, I have no time. He said, are you getting paid for this? She said, no, but I just help the kids cross the street. And then he said, well, what are you doing after this on Thursday? And she said, well, on Thursdays, I take food to the hospital so the patients will have some nice food to eat. And he said, do you have time to volunteer in your neighborhood? And she said, no, I have absolutely no time. And she didn't regard that as volunteering. It was just like what neighbors do. And it's the power of norms. Jen, do you have advice for our mythological do-gooder?
Your mythological do-gooder. I mean, I would just echo, start where you are. I can tell the story of myself. I am guilty, y'all, of having lived in a place for the past better part of 14 years and having done national work, sleeping in Nashville, Tennessee, but not really knowing what was happening in Nashville, Tennessee, until I took a job where I get to work and give money to people who do work on youth in the environment. And so all of a sudden, I was meeting one-on-one with some of our grantee partners, amazing people who are doing things like planting trees in some of the hottest zones in Nashville, which happen to be low-income communities. I got the opportunity to connect with people who were leading after-school programs. And you know what that meant? I now knew that there are cool, every month in the month of April, there are kite days at Mill Ridge Park. And my son, who loves kites, I got to fly kites with him. And so I say all that to say, at a time where it feels like we are so, and I will say this as a millennial and speaking on behalf of my generation, chronically online, where it seems like we are living in a world outside of the one where we actually reside. To use some slang, go outside and touch some grass, friends, right? Both literally because the planet needs it. The planet needs you to reconnect with it, but also touching grass, being planted where you are, understanding. And it doesn't, I think it sometimes can feel so daunting, but I think, being able to connect with your Miss Donna and see what's happening in the neighborhood, because I guarantee you she knows because she'll sit and peek on the curtain, right? And is in relationship with most of the folks in the block. Finding those opportunities, sure, to volunteer. All of those are small ways that we can begin to, again, create conditions of friendship, get to know what's happening in our communities. And when we know what's happening in our communities, we start to care in a different way. And so I think there's also a ton of really great resources for folks who are interested in learning more about what it means to cultivate and build trust. I would direct you, again, I shouted out my homegirl, Lennon Flowers, but she just has a new project called Trust Labs that just started that has a series of amazing resources online. All of our archive work from the People's Supper lives there. So I'd invite you to check out their website, wearetrustlabs.org, as a repository of information and toolkits to get started, because sometimes it can be intimidating even to have the first conversation. And so we have a set of questions that might be helpful for you as you're thinking about maybe hosting a dinner party or getting to know your neighbor.
Yeah. Rich, I want to center on that concept of trust, because it is to me, the most important statistics in American society is what they call interpersonal trust. Institutional trust in institutions, that declined during Vietnam and Watergate. But interpersonal trust, do you trust your neighbors? That's been a slow, steady decline. And so 2 generations ago, 60% of people said they trust their neighbors. And now it's not 60%, it's 30%. And I think the most disturbing thing to me, and I'm going to ask you about how do you turn this around, is it's pretty generational. That boomers and Gen X, pretty high social trust. But millennial and Gen Z, only 19% say they trust their neighbors. And so this suggests some sort of societal trend. And it's pretty daunting. So how do you think about that? And how do you think about building trust in an atmosphere like that?
I think of, I've come to believe, David, that we face a crisis of belief, a belief in ourselves and in one another, a belief, as you've written about eloquently about in our institutions, a belief in our own faith. Even though there's a rise in spirituality, there's a crisis of faith in a lot of us. I think we're in kind of a fight or flight mode. I think that's even below the polarization, what we call polarization. I think we either believe that we need to come out swinging to win at any cost, or we flee the public square for fear of saying something wrong, or fear of getting into an argument, or fear of our neighbor, as you're describing. And so I think for me, the way I think about this is what engenders belief. What engenders belief? And I think part of what engenders belief is us learning how to talk to one another in the way that Jem was just speaking about, to create the conditions where that can occur. And in my own work, that means helping people focus on their shared aspirations because it activates something deep within them. And as we talk about it, we realize we won't agree on everything, but there are some things we hold in common. And our shared aspirations also implicates us because we can't reach them on our own. We need each other. So that's one part of this. But I think if we're really serious about this crisis of belief, I think we have to recognize, and Michael, you were getting at this, that it's going to require us to build things together. We can't simply talk, we have to do things. Because it's only in doing things that we recognize our own innate capabilities, that we recognize other people's gifts and talents, that we have to see and hear each other and lift up each other's dignity, that we start to regain a sense of agency and re-experience a shared humanity. And so I think in this moment of this crisis of belief, one of my fears, if I can say this, because I know we're supposed to be upbeat here, but one of my fears is that we will lock ourselves in to the idea that if we simply hold more forums and talk more, we're going to adequately address this crisis of belief. I don't think that's true. I think we need to come together and build together because I think that's so central to the human experience and to creating a sense of civic joy.
Yeah, can you describe, as you're talking, I'm thinking of people I've met who do build stuff. And it can be as simple. I remember I ran into a woman in Watts in LA. She runs an organization, it's just a bunch of moms, called Sisters of Watts. And they just clean up empty lots and they put backpacks in for kids who need some support, and they help the homeless find showers. And these are pretty mundane things, but they're practical, physical things the community needs. Are there examples you point to that you've met where you think, when we talk about building something, that it's a concrete thing they're doing right here?
Sure, those are all good examples. I think of a woman in Flint. You're just mentioning this, David, who created a community garden because she wanted to create a space to develop the character of young people. And she did it through that. I'll just go back to Reading, where they're creating transformational systemic change and building things. And by coming together around, let's say, English as a second language, they had tons of resources before it. They had a literacy council. But people were afraid to come out of their homes because of violence in the community and a lack of social connection. And they were afraid to practice English with others who spoke English. And so one example was a faith leader came together and said, well, I can hold a dinner in my basement and we can bring folks who are learning English and folks who are English speakers who want to learn Spanish. And we can not only increase language skills, we can build social capital. Now, that led to a whole lot of other things that they've built, where they've now activated the community college to train more teachers. They've activated young kids in schools to come out and become supporters as well. They've developed all sorts of new ways for people to learn English in workplaces. So they've essentially catalyzed and unleashed a chain reaction of actions of lots of different people coming together and building. And here's the thing about this. They're all doing this in small pockets, but they're all working with a shared purpose. And I think over time, that's the point that we've got to get to if we're going to change the trajectory of the country.
Yeah. Michael, you've worked at local community groups and you've worked at big national organizations. How do you think about this scaling issue? And how do you think about the fact that now it feels like we're as much in a national crisis as in a series of local neighborhood crises?
Well, local action matters because people live locally. and sometimes the big national organizations begin to lose their identity. I think one of the things that founders, one of my good friends, Lois Lufborough, founded Summerbridge, which became Breakthrough Collaborative. And she's in her 80s now, and she would always tell me, I worried as we were growing that we would lose that special secret sauce. And I think any founder, whether it's the founder of a big restaurant chain or a founder of a nonprofit, worries that you get bigger and you have that disconnection and you become routinized, and you can raise a lot of money for philanthropy because they like to see things growing. But there's something special in those few early years where you can touch the young people that you're working with or the elders that you're working with, where you can have a direct connection to impact. And so local matters because that's where people live. The other thing I would say about scale is new is happening every day. AmeriCorps was actually founded because President Clinton saw City Year. And Michael Brown and Alan Casey were dorm roommates at Harvard, and they were kids. They are not kids anymore, almost 40 years later. But just 40 years ago, they were kids in a dorm room who created this wonderful thing. President Clinton saw these kids wanting to come together and do something great. And we created AmeriCorps. 34 years ago, Wendy Kopp was a young person starting Teach for America. 34 years ago, Vanessa Kirsch was a young person starting New Profit. And those are now all big, huge organizations that people are saying, wow, isn't that great? But over my time at AmeriCorps, I met guys who started Rainbow Labs, who said, you know what, gay kids like sports too, and we can use this as a way to bring them in. Or I met Domingo Morales, who, had a neck tattoo and said he wasn't sure who was going to hire him. So he found this Green City Force AmeriCorps program in the Bronx that did kind of climate work in the city. And he said, I didn't know about dirt, but I fell in love with dirt. And he started something called Compost Power, which now hires AmeriCorps members for their contracts with the city. We saw Lead for America and American Connection Corps. And so scale, we look at it now, but every single day there are people that are excited, that are starting new things, that are breaking things and seeing what works and evolving. And what's been really interesting watching young people of late, they're actually more likely to start their own things than generations before them. And they're not going to wait. And so I tell my colleagues that are running big national organizations, you better bring them in. You better bring them to the power seat. You better put them on your board. You better put them in your C-suite. Otherwise, your organization that is big and beautiful and scaled is going to go the way of the dinosaur. And these young people are going to break and recreate and reimagine the way that impact happens on the local level.
Yeah. I will say the executive director of Weave is a guy named Fred Riley.
My dear friend, Fred Riley. Everybody loves Fred.
One of a kind, Fred Riley. One of the innovations that I thought was he initiated, which was really valuable, is we provide small grants to support people who are in the communities. But you don't have to fill out a big foundation type grant application. You can talk into your phone for 90 seconds and this is what I'm doing. And that's it. That's all you need to do. And so that gives access to people who are too busy to fill out big grant applications. Jen, how do you think about this, the national climate question and the stuff you're doing in Nashville and around the country? There's a phrase in the book of Job, and the sparks fly upward. And I like to think the sparks will all fly upwards, but some days I have my doubts.
Well, I was just having a conversation last week with a dear friend who is a futurist. So I've been thinking a lot about the future lately. And I think part of my obsession with the future is that I have two young children and I want a future for them. But one of the things that she said as she does her work, her name's Mia Birdsong, and she's an incredible leader out of Oakland, California, is that, right now we have to plant seeds. And the soil we're planting on might be toxic, but we have to plant them anyway. And so it got me thinking, and I started learning from another friend of mine, Amber Banks, about phytoremediation. Like that's actually sometimes you can plant things that help the soil heal. So things like sunflowers, for example, help the soil heal in toxic conditions. And so it's a metaphor I've been holding pretty closely to my heart as I think about all the projects I see being seeded in this season, whether it be young people starting new initiatives in response to and maybe pushing back against some of the big legacy institutions that were once founded by people who were young people, right? Or whether it be, I'm thinking about the Rafa Institute here in Nashville, Tennessee. I met with their executive director, Travis, last week. Now, The Rafa Institute has been focused on restorative justice and alternatives to incarceration for a long time. But one of the things that they started seeding a few years ago that people didn't quite get when they started doing it was investing in early childhood education. Why? Because they saw all of these kids who were 13, 14, 15 being swept up into the juvenile justice system, and they had younger siblings who were 2, 3, 4, 5, who were in the same household and same set of conditions. And so they asked ourselves a question: hey, what would it look like if we started to train some of these grandmas, some of these aunties who are in public housing, who are already watching kids, doing a more intensive program that would just boost the quality of the education and support they're able to provide these young kids, right, at a young age? They may not be certified daycare providers with the state, but they could at least become authorized. Those little baby steps, right, and that sort of outside the box thinking is what's going to get us free, I think, from the shackles of that have been placed on our imagination. And one of the things I've been saying a lot to our partners lately is one of the more insidious things that I think is happening in this moment, because everything seems urgent, and particularly in the nonprofit sector, where folks are just desperately grasping for any sort of resources to stay afloat in this moment, given cuts to the federal funding and state funding, is what does it mean that we're being robbed of our opportunity to dream and imagine? So we're so holding so tightly to what has been, but we don't have space to really imagine what could be an alternative, right? And so I'm really invested in planting sunflower seeds that help make the soil a little less toxic and creates conditions for people to be able to dream about what to do on that land moving forward.
Now we've got 5 minutes left, but Rich said something profound that's been bouncing around my head, which was this is about faith. And I do think that's true. Trust is faith in other people will do what they ought to do.
Yeah.
And you also used the word aspiration.
Mm-hmm.
And when you said that, and Jen, you're an actual
I was going to say, listen, I will speak in terms of faith as a clergywoman of the Black church. I am happy to talk about faith all day, any day.
But when I came to experience faith, religious faith, I was surprised it was less felt like a creed and more like a longing.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like an aspiration. And one of my heroes is a woman named Dorothy Day, and she wrote a book called The Long
Me
Loneliness.
too. Yeah, she's actually one of my great models.
Great model. But by loneliness, she didn't mean solitude. She meant the longing for God.
Yes.
So talk to us a little more, Rich, and then maybe we'll just go around and conclude on this point of when you say it's a crisis of faith, what does that mean for us?
I think it means, do we have a belief that at one level, community matters? Do we have a belief that we matter in the world? Do we still have a belief that we have innate capabilities to take action on something? Do we believe if we step forward, someone else will come with us? We're in a prisoner's dilemma right now of sorts. I think there is a deep yearning about, do we have a belief that decency still matters, that empathy matters, that compassion matters? And I think, again, as I was saying before, I think this belief lives within each of us. It's already innate, right? It's here. And I believe there is a light within each of us. I think the challenge for so many of us is that light has been denigrated. It's been diminished. It's been denied. We've been told not to shine it too much. And so I think as one of the things that a common theme that I think we've all been talking about is you can't compel people to have faith, but you can help to ignite what's already within them. And so what I say to folks a lot is we each have a light. Some of us, it's shining bright. And our goal is to help touch other people to ignite their light. You know, David, I'm a Jew, and in my faith, there's a teaching which is in many faiths, which is if you save one life, you save the world. And I often ask, well, why do they teach us that? Because it can't be true. But as we all know, it tells us that we believe in the universality of life. We believe in the dignity of each and every individual, and every small act matters. and one small act can ignite a whole chain reaction of other actions. And um, so that's where how I think about belief. And I actually have come to believe, after 40 years of doing this work, that this is at the crux of the challenge we face. And it's why, as Michael was so eloquently talking, it's why I think this work has to begin in our local communities, where we can see and hear one another, touch one another, work together, build together.
Okay, we've got about 40 seconds left, so I feel I should just ask Reverend Jen Bailey to offer a benediction. So final thoughts on faith.
Yeah, I grew up like many folks in the Christian tradition, and the definition of faith hearing quoted over and over again Hebrews 11:1, which says that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. But in my own faith walk, I've come to understand faith as being trust in the absence of certainty. And I think one of the things that is true about this moment in American society is it feels like there's not a lot that we can be certain of day by day. In fact, it feels like change is the one thing that is true. And so I guess one of the things that I'm sitting with in this moment is how do we find within ourselves a space to trust in the absence of that certainty? Time is filled with swift transitions, as a hymn in the Black Church says, right? The only thing that we know how to do is hold, in the case of the church, to God's unchanging hand. But for those of us who may not, right, believe in God, as it were, how do we hold on to our neighbor's hand? How do we hold on to our friend's hand to navigate this season of uncertainty? Build the trust to imagine something new.
Okay. There's a Talmudic phrase, which I'm about to butcher, which is you don't have an obligation to finish the work, but neither are you free from desisting from beginning it. And that's not the exact phrase, but that's Richard, you can correct my butchering of that Talmudic phrase. But as I hoped and anticipated, I started this call really feeling under the weather, and you guys have lit me up, and I hope you've lit up people around the country who are going to watch this, and it's hopeful in a dark time that there really are possibilities for, to use a faithful phrase, for redemption and for recovery. So for Michael, Jen, and Richard, I thank you all.
I am thrilled to be able to speak with you about this moment that we're in. I know that both of us are really hopeful for the future of our country, and we realize that a lot needs to change at the same time. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And so, Fred, I know your work at Weave well, but everyone watching may not be familiar. So I'd love to hear more about what you're focused on and what you created the Weave Project.
Yeah, so the Weave Project was founded in 2018 by New York Times author David Brooks. As he says, he was writing about doom and gloom and wanted to find a way to combat some of the polarization and things he was writing, but was traveling around the country. And he would meet people, weavers in every community who are showing up differently, who are helping neighbors, building mutuality, showing up and loving their entire community. They didn't have a name for what they were doing. And so we founded Weave as a way to provide support for those people who are showing up a little differently in community. We fund projects, we have tools and resources, we amplify their voices so we can inspire other people to dig in deeper in their community. We're housed at the Aspen Institute, and for the last 75 years since World War II, we've been working on creating a more fair, a more just, and a more equitable society. Tell me a little bit more about 92NY. Like, you all have a story. Anytime somebody says 92NY, like everybody lights up. And so tell us what you do there.
Yeah, absolutely. So 92NY is short for the 92nd Street Y, which is a 150-year-old cultural and community center in New York City. So we have everything you would imagine from a large cultural institution: dance performances, music concerts, talks. We have a nursery school. We have Jewish life programming. We have after school care. We have a gym. We have camps. So it's really just this incredible place of community on a massive building on the Upper East Side of New York City. And I lead the Belfer Center for Innovation and Social Impact, which is housed at 92NY. And we build and scale innovative solutions to today's crisis of community, which is what we're talking about here: the rise of disconnection and disaffiliation that we really see as the heart of a lot of the biggest challenges that we see in society, everything from rising polarization to isolation, declining mental health. The Belfer Center is best known for having created the global generosity movement Giving Tuesday, and then also Share Our America, which is a national initiative to rebuild trust and bridge divides through dialogue and community engagement. So,
Wow.
so many parallels between
So,
the work that we do.
not parallels, we're working together. So that's
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
I'd love to just hear a little bit more about what drives you and how your upbringing has shaped your approach to this work.
Yeah, Rebecca, that's a really good question. And I tell the story often of this Midwestern city I grew up in, Saginaw, Michigan, and has been voted one of the most miserable places to live. But I think there's another narrative that I hope that people would go on to say, and it's one of my childhood. I grew up in a town of folks who have and folks who have not. And I was one of those who had not. But it was an entire community of people who cared for me, who've helped me knit my life together. It was folks in the communities that helped our family stay in the home when it got hard to pay rent, or helped our power stay on in those cold Midwestern days when our power was almost shut off. It was those people in the community, my childhood pastor who told me I was important, or my elementary school teacher who helped to set me on a path to like really be deep into my studies. It was those everyday people who showed up for people. I think what people don't understand is that in those smaller towns where there's less industry, less income, people rely on one another to get by. And so that drives me in my work every day, supporting people who are showing up for neighbors and communities. It makes the difference. I feel like I'm representing my hometown every day when I'm doing this work around the country, because I wouldn't be here without that community of Saginaw, Michigan.
How do you think that was cultivated?
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a special thing that I think today feels rare, but
Yeah.
was such an important part of your life.
Although the national headlines say doom, gloom, isolation, I still see people across the country showing up for one another, just like they did in my childhood. And so I still think it's deep into the fabric of our country. Our work is really trying to extract it out so more people actually do it, but also know that it's happening at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've felt that in my own life of, having family members who couldn't speak to each other for years
Yeah.
because of political differences or identity differences. And there's really this feeling, I think, today of we step away whenever there's that challenge, whenever there's a difficulty and a bridge to cross with connecting with someone. And it breaks my heart, because I constantly hear these stories of relationships that have broken down because of an inability to connect when there's difference presence. And as you say, it's exacerbated by the media and by politicians. There's this narrative that the only welcoming and safe place is with people who agree with us. And
Uh,
I just don't think that's true.
yeah.
Every day, at the Belfer Center, we host Share America gatherings with the Weavers that you host at Aspen. We see people who are vastly different from
Yeah.
each other, finding respect and understanding and the ability to build trust. And it can be done,
Yeah.
and it's worth doing.
It can be done and it is done. But Rebecca, let me ask you a question because as you are reading the headlines, like I'd love to hear about the hope that you're seeing and what drives you in this moment. The work you're doing at the Belfer Center and at the 92nd Street Y, you've had a lot of different windows to take and create change. Why do you care about what happens in communities across the country right now?
Yeah, I think really the sum of it is that I care because I have young children, and
Mm,
I don't want to think about them living in the world that our current moment leads to.
yeah.
I just when I play out what's happening today, if that trend continues for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, what that world is going to look like for my kids when they're grown. And that's not the world I want to leave for them. And I don't think it has to be like that. I think there really is another way, and I see it in the work that we do in communities across the country. I hear it in the conversations we're having, that people are coming together. I mean, that's what the conversations in this summit today are focused on, that a better way is possible. And I really want to keep that in the foreground, that hope isn't lost. And with some effort, some reframing, some commitment, we can create a more trusting and connected culture. And I want to be part of creating the world that I know is possible, and the world that I want my kids to be able to grow up in.
Wow. I love that.
I think in my work, I really try and think about how can I create that at a systemic level?
Yeah.
How could I take what I'm trying to create for my family and create opportunities to do that for more and more people? Because I think both have to happen. Yes, there's a million individual choices that ladder up to systemic change, and the onus can't completely be on individuals. We also have to say, how do we create new institutions, new opportunities, new policies and systems that make it more feasible for
Yeah.
people to make choices that lead to more connection and lead to a greater community. Um, because yeah, it's not fair to put that all on individuals who are just trying to pay the bills.
I agree. I think what you just said is everybody has a role in showing up differently. It demands of us in this period that we're in as a nation and as a world to show up. It demands something differently.
Yeah. And when you think about that, like, what do you think that role is for each individual person? Like, what can they do as an individual to really create a different kind of connection?
Yeah. Rebecca, I work and I lead this work called Weave the Social Fabric Project, where we're supporting everyday leaders in neighborhoods who are just showing up, building trust and connections, and working on issues at the neighborhood level. I think as I think about what everybody should do or what they could do, I would have a laundry list of things. But I think more importantly, it is showing up where you live. I think folks want this magic bullet logic model and scenario to create change, but change can be as simple as tilling a community garden together with your neighbors who you are not in relationship with, getting to know them over that labor of tilling the garden and helping to cement the relationship. Right now, we live in a society and in a world where people say, go at it alone. You can do this by yourself. But it is proven that we need each other to get by. We need our families, we need our friends, but we also need our neighbors. And so, how people can actually dial in better in this moment is be a good neighbor, show up, be consistent, and get active in something in your local community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in the work we do at Share Our America, where we bring together in communities across the country to use dialogue and community engagement, to be able to bridge differences, we really see that one, you have to show up, you have to be there, you have to be face to face, because if you're not meeting
Yep.
people, you're not building connection, you're not building community. But then there's also this component of how you show up
Yep.
where you're showing up from a place of curiosity.
Yep.
You're showing up from a place of wanting to understand. And I really feel like that's kind of the thing that's shifted in
Yeah.
previous years is
Yep.
that, when we were growing up, it just felt like there was more of a culture of, uh, let me understand you, let me get to know you, let me hear your story, and not immediately jump to, do you think like me? Or can I convince you to think like me? And I think if we can find a way to just change the mindset from even like, how do I find common ground with you? But instead to just say, how do I understand you?
Yeah, totally.
How do I listen to what you're sharing with the sole goal of understanding the experiences and the stories that you've lived and how they shape your beliefs? And just connecting with you as a person. I just think it can really transform how we engage and have seen that. I've seen that
Yeah.
happen.
Our brains are wired to be connected. Listen, I didn't make this up. I've read books about it. This isn't me. I'm not that smart, but it's true. People have to be in relationship. And that's why we see right now these growing levels of isolation and mental health and all these other disparities that are off the chart is because people are afraid. And when they're afraid and when they lack trust, they retreat. And right now we're trying to figure out how to get people to at least go test the waters to make, and if you test it enough, it becomes less risky and then you'll jump all the way in. And so as we think about how to get people active and to get them to like connect off things, these differences that we share, I think you got to get them working together first. And I think those differences, you actually forget about them.
I know we've had this conversation previously of like, it's also about shared commitment because well, you've referenced research. I know the incredible research coming out of a lot of the longevity studies where you say, what are the things that lead to the longest longevity? What are also the things that people say are their biggest regrets? And it's all about relationships. People live the longest, healthiest lives when they have deep, meaningful relationships. And when people reflect on their lives, they say the thing that mattered the most was my relationships. And so we know this. We see it over and over again in research. And when I talk to people, it's also the thing they say is I want more community. I want deeper relationships. I want to feel stronger connection. But I think there's this sense of feeling stymied about how to do it. And I love what you emphasize of one, you just have to start. You just have to go out and do it, take a tiny step and grow from there. But I think there's also this point around, I think there can be a lot of focus on what can I get from community. And you gotta also focus on what you can give to community. And I think that's a big thing is, what are the commitments that I'm making to the communities I'm a part of, whether they be formal institutions or organizations, or whether they be just my neighborhood. Um, but, if you don't give a cup of sugar to your neighbor, they're not gonna, be open to doing it for you
Yeah,
too. And
I agree.
that mindset shift, I think, is another really important one of saying, despite my busy schedule and all the pressures on me and everything that I'm managing, how do I find a way, whatever small way it is, to make a commitment that feels possible? Uh, because we get more from the things that we invest more in.
I totally agree, Rebecca, but that's how our country has become who we are because we are a nation of people who joined in and came together. Um, I guess my question for you is like, what is it going to take to grow this real revolution or quiet revolution of what's happening locally into a norm in our country? Like, how do we change this? We know it's happening on the ground in communities, but how do we get to turn the switch and have it just happen faster everywhere?
Yeah, yeah, and I don't wanna sound like a hammer looking for a nail here because I recognize I work at a community institution,
Yeah,
but I
you're
do
a hope peddler is what you are, and I love it, right?
Chief Hope Officer.
That's right.
But I do think that there is a role for institutions to play. Like, we have a model for how to do this. We've done this for generations through institutions in our communities, whether that be religious institutions, community institutions, social institutions, neighborhood groups. Like, we've seen what this looks like. And there are so many examples of places that provide community care, support for life cycle transitions, support in painful moments, really deep and meaningful community. Like, we have examples to look to. We don't need to just sort of create this brand new. And I think that there's really an opportunity to look to some of the institutions that have existed previously and think about how do we update them for this current moment, rather than saying, how do we start from zero and recreate the wheel to find a way to build really significant and meaningful community. And so I do feel very bullish on the role that institutions can play in drawing from past experiences to support folks as they build deeper community. And there is absolutely a need for institutions to change and to meet people where they are and to think about community in a way that is relevant to today, because so many community institutions previously were very exclusionary, and that has to go away. So many community institutions previously focused on one way of engaging, come to the Elks Club in person in your community, and that may not be relevant for people today. So I think there's really pragmatic ways that institutions need to shift how they engage with community. And then there's more systemic ways of being more welcoming to more kinds of people, so that we're not in sort of our isolated institutions, but we're finding places to all come together. Um, but I do think that there's an important message around looking at where we've done this before and adjusting those models, rather than saying we need to completely create all new models, which can feel really daunting.
So I'm going to say this, right? I believe that everybody should make their commitment to community as large as the complaints that they have about community. Right now, everybody's complaining about this and no loneliness, and we're complaining about those things, but nobody is stepping up to say, I'm going to go knock on my neighbor's door who I don't believe and I haven't seen in a couple of weeks. I want to make sure they're okay. So I want everybody who's listening in to figure out how their complaints about community, how they can actually make their commitment to building community larger than the complaint.
Talking with you fills me with so much hope. I'm so grateful to be in this work with you. And thank you for this conversation.
Rebecca, thank you so much. Everybody who's joined us, stay with us. There's going to be more to come. You're going to hear from folks who are actually weaving and doing the work on the ground in their community. And finally, we'll hear from Rainn Wilson, who's going to remind us of this time we're in and this new American revolution we're building upon our nation's 250th birthday. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's me, Rainn, again. Nice to see you all. Hope you're enjoying these incredible conversations. Inspiring, a little bit daunting, true. Too often we think that our path to reuniting America is just by talking. I mean, we've heard that trust comes mainly through doing things together. Reverend Bailey said it's the small acts between neighbors that cultivate the conditions for friendship to thrive. Then friendships breed trust, and trust breeds change. In Reading, Pennsylvania, Rich Harwood said that the narrative of the town being deeply divided over politics and class was only changed when people started working together on local issues that mattered. A while back, I wrote a little book called Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution. And one of the central ideas about that spiritual revolution is that it has to happen at the grassroots, on the local level, from the bottom up, not top down. We need to get to the root of the spiritual disease that divides us, and not just use superficial band-aids of legislation to cover up a much deeper imbalance of the heart and the soul. And this imbalance has to be addressed in our towns and our neighborhoods, in our families, at our schools, and at our local cul-de-sacs. So if you've been waiting for politicians to come to their senses and bring us all together, I hate to share the news, that's not going to happen anytime soon. The work is up to us. We don't have to start big. We can start small, really, really, really small. A couple of lawn chairs and a cooler with drinks in it on the street or in a driveway can be enough to get the neighbors gathering, then sharing tools, then sharing babysitters, and then who knows what? Building community. In some places, neighbors have lost the public places where people would naturally gather and build connection and start to work together and invest in their communities. So in the second half of the summit, you're going to hear from folks who are starting where they are, taking small actions that are making a big difference. You're going to hear from a veteran who has opened a blacksmithing forge in Virginia. his dedication to his community rippling out to support thousands, and from weavers who have worked to create trusting spaces for people to gather in North Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky. But first, some people you should know who know people you should know.
Are these things rolling?
Yeah, they are.
Well, we should be interesting then. The crew and I are back on the road. Hey, quick question.
Please.
What are we doing?
So this is a making of a feel-good show. Right?
Small point. I don't even know if it's a show. Well, let's just make sure the cameras are rolling on this.
Why we are here today is because of a woman named Judalyn Cassidy. Rusty Durham.
Her name is
Lindsay.
All right, it's all coming back to me.
It's going to be a great day.
Shut up. We're still on the basic mission of introducing the country to neighbors you wish you had.
Steve, I would love to introduce you to Mike.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
You look familiar.
Oh, can I hug you?
Can I stop you?
Oh my gosh.
Welcome to the They're Making It Up As They Go Along show. I don't know where we're going. So ideally, what happens? What are we doing?
This is Bob.
Hi, Bob. How's it going? Great. Honestly, it's embarrassing how good I am at this. I believe in the power of pointing our cameras in the right place.
They say 22 veterans take their lives per day. We teach blacksmithing and bladesmithing as a therapeutic outlet.
Hot yoga has nothing on us.
TAC stands for Teaching the Autism Community Trades.
That inspired me to start thinking about like, hey, how can I get books to kids?
Free books, free books. We'll just put some of these fairy tale books out.
Yeah, I think fairy tale would be a good theme for today.
Why is it not brought up that 90% of the autism community is unemployed? There is a giant demographic of people jumping up and down saying we want to work.
How dramatic an impact can a bike have?
First, it gives people some dignity. They can get to a job. It expands their radius.
What do you need?
The funding started with my plumbing salary.
No one is paid.
I took my disability check, and that's how I funded this.
You know, sites like this make me wonder what's happening with audio. You guys can take 5. You were saying?
I was saying, we're going to be starting our reveal here.
So guys, he'll be here in looks like 2 minutes.
Who are all these people?
We're going to take care of your rent for the next 18 months. $50,000. Just like that, you got a TV show. On digital, obviously.
We don't choose these people willy-nilly.
I should hope not. With a title like People You Should Know,
Right.
We are
Right.
suggesting to the viewer that we've kicked the tires.
I am Sarah Yorgrow. I'm a producer and social anthropologist. I've spent the last 10 years digging into stories that help to bridge our divides, help us feel more connected and a little more human together. And I have the privilege of having worked with this human being in front of me, a man who is not afraid to get his hands dirty and has spent the majority of your career honoring other people who do the same, Mr. Michael Rowe.
Mike is fine, Sarah. We go back long enough, I think. Mike is fine. Yes, thanks. You know, I mean, it is a weird, crooked road that both of us have taken. And I worked in the industry for a long time. I was 42 when Dirty Jobs blew up. And when I realized I was probably a better guest than a host, you know, and that format. Look, we've featured dirty jobbers in this format, but mad scientists and inventors and bloody do-gooders, it's a rich pageant, as REM would say. And the thing that's most interesting today for me, and the fun thing of working with you, somebody who's younger and hipper and cooler with more hair and all of that kind of thing, is that we get to be wrong a lot on camera.
Yeah.
And it's okay, you know, because if you have that level of permission, if the viewer knows that your main purpose is to introduce them to a neighbor that they wish they had, then all of the other crap that comes along with so much production just fades away, and you're really left alone to build the plane you want to build, even though you might be in the air when you're doing it.
We've done hundreds of different communities and individuals across the country. The prerequisite is, are they doing this with or without the cameras on? They can have a 501c3 or just be someone working out of their kitchen and really dedicated to the cause. And we don't, we showcase every walk of life in America because it is all about the mission. But we have this one specific example of someone that we adore everybody we feature, but there's one, a man named Luke Mickelson, whose story is just like a perfect encapsulation of so many of the sort of domino effect of media being used in this way. Luke Mickelson started with a small little humble project in his garage. He was building a bed for someone that he heard about in need. He realized he had some extra wood and started looking into, is there another use for another bed? Discovered that there's a massive epidemic of child bedlessness in this country, which is not just uncomfortable and hard to think about, but also one of the biggest caveats for people being put into foster care or being able to stay home, right? He started, when we featured him, he had about 30 chapters domestically, maybe even less, 4, way less, 4. Yeah,
was 6.
exactly.
It was
6.
6.
Okay.
Yeah, and just so people understand, this is a guy up in Twin Falls, right, Idaho. He's making bunk beds, and he's agitated. He wakes up every morning, and he's pissed off because there are kids in his town who are sleeping on the floor, and he's like, I can't deal. So he makes shirts and slogans, "No kid sleeps on the floor in my town." They get half a dozen chapters of these bloody do-gooders making these bunk beds. This is actually the day you and I met, Sarah.
Yeah, it is. It's the exact
Right?
day. Yeah.
So we walk into this guy's garage, and it's like a wood shop on steroids. And
Totally.
we make our show, but 6 months later, you get a phone call.
I get a phone call. The man has thousands of chapters at this point. I mean, when he got that phone call, he had 300 or something that had popped up, just people coming out of the woodwork literally to be able to build this bed. And now he has over 2,000 chapters. Now he does and domestically, and he's gone internationally. He got so big that he left his job, right? And he is this massive, he is an everyday guy who just saw a need, saw his ability to build a bed, and now is solving an enormous problem. And he does this really cool thing where we are able to now plug him in everything that we work on People You Should Know. What we did on Returning the Favor now with People You Should Know is we offer them a network effect, right? We are only as strong as our ability to plug into a larger network and community and to build coalition with each other around a shared mission. And so we've been able to plug him in even on our first episode of People You Should Know, featuring an organization called Care Portal.
Right. Because in the end, it's a community, and the people that you feature become their own community. And what a mistake to forget about them. So we're constantly circling back. The whole thing gets very, very meta, very, very, very quickly. But yeah, I think that the honesty of the show, the willingness to be wrong, and the fact that it's still programmed by the viewers, that's the secret sauce. Luke's entire life has been changed. He's changed many thousands of families' lives.
It's a perfect segue into the individual we're going to bring on in conversation right now. It's, you're asking the audience not to to really, I think one of the other messages is just like, trust yourself too. Trust that in your close proximity to a problem, in your close proximity to the community, that you also have agency and the ability to know just as much, at least, as another person about how to potentially solve this. And which is why I think Steve Hotz is the perfect person to bring on into this conversation. Steve Hotz is the CEO, the founder of Black Horse Forge, which is doing unbelievable work to help mitigate and stop the incessant flow of PTSD veteran suicide in this country, which is really, the numbers are pretty horrifying if you look at them. He has discovered that by bringing individuals with PTSD or traumatic brain injury, like so many of our vets return home with, to a master craft, any kind of craft like blacksmithing that helps actually keep the focus and keep the neural pathways, along with bringing community involved there, is able to change. He's had 22,000 people come into his forge and 0 suicides. So I'd love to bring him in.
And there he is. What's up, buddy?
Hello, how's it going?
Everything's
How are you,
fantastic, man.
Steve?
Great. It's always great.
Oh my
Always a
gosh.
good day.
Well, we're so good. Yeah.
You're in your
Done.
forge right now, or you're in your bedroom? I can't tell.
I'm in my home office, away from the banging and stuff. Sometimes I have to have a clear thought and, place to, there's other things that you do besides the forge, admin and things like this and podcasts like this. So I'm very humbled to be here and have my voice heard a little bit.
Oh, well, Steve, you feel like such a natural person to bring on into this because of your, I think a lot of people who are watching, who maybe are joining this conference and who are tuning in right now, a big question is how do people even begin this kind of stuff, and how do you go from this, or this kind of work is something that other people do? Could you bring us into a little bit of the mindset of how you went from discovering this was an issue to realizing you might be the one to help solve this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I love to talk to people, and my wife will tell you that, she'll go with me and I'll just start talking to people and she walks away and she knows she'll come back and get me. But one time, she was my fiance at the time, my girlfriend, and I had a really bad injury, which actually put me out of the military. And it ended up making me blind in my left eye, and the injury was really horrific to look at the time. And she said something to me that kind of started this in my journey. It's a Spanish proverb. It basically translates, "There's no bad from which good does not come." It reflects the belief that even in difficult or painful situations, something positive can eventually emerge. And with that, a lot of vets get out and we're searching for something we don't know. And you go to the traditional route and the VA and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times, first thing they do is give you medication and or some other things that didn't work for me, right? So she found a blacksmithing uh, program for me. I went. I was so happy. I came back and I made a hook, right? And she looked at me. She goes, "I don't know what you did, but keep doing it." So when people ask me that, I get that quite a bit. What can I do? How do I start? And the way I started was like a lot of people, I think a lot of people think that you have to have this giant wallet, like funding. Yeah, that would be great, right? Is that the ultimate? No. You can think within a earshot, there's problems throughout, and you just have to start listening. Be humble, listen, right? Listen to what your community needs. It's not hard. And then you say, what do they need? What's missing? Um, what are people hurting or disconnected? And that's what I did, right? So as I was on my own journey, I was building these connections. And it's you can look what you have, just not your wallet. Like what's in your hand, what's in your heart, you know, and maybe it's a skill, maybe it's a story, maybe you're making cookies, right? Or believe it or not, maybe it's the willingness just to show up to a program that you discovered to help, right?
Steve, I think it's important for the viewer to understand that so many people have come at this problem from so many different directions. You know, we've profiled, I think, 14 different organizations that are trying to crack the PTSD code. I've gone with guys into the Everglades to pull out pythons. We've rehabilitated old motorcycles, you know. They all work to different degrees, I think, because it pulls these men and women out of their head and gets them focused as a team on a goal, right? So, but brother, I've been around. I've been to every state many times, and I've highlighted a lot of organizations. 22,000 vets, all wrestling to varying degrees with whatever, and 0 suicides in a world where 17 or 18 of these guys are punching their ticket every single day. That's headline news. And, you know, I'm really interested to know if there's a secret sauce to what you're doing and what the plan is to get a Black Horse Forge in every town.
Well, I joke because I was in infantry and I just say I'm just a grunt, right? But what in learning and like anything, being humble to listen, what I found out with blacksmithing and master crafts of anything, that the reconnection of the synapses and stuff in the brain, which doctors can explain way better than me, um, actually helps them uh, it actually kind of trains the brain to think a little bit differently. And the fact that we give them a mission every week, a lot of these programs is a one and done, right? So you get on this really big high and then it's a really bad low because you can't duplicate it. Where we duplicate this every day. Like the Forge literally has keys on the wall that you can come 24/7 if you need help. Because when you need help, you need now, not 9 to 5. The other thing is self-reporting. The guys come in and they connect with someone, and if you don't see someone in the forge like 2 or 3 times, they call, they check in. It's not a it's not a Facebook, it's a physical call, or they'll go by the house, or you know, there's times that it's worse, like Memorial Day. I gather orphans, what I call them, guys that I know that are single there. We bring them together, we share meals, and we let them have conversations. And then the other thing is, a lot of times for help, is veterans were very hard to trust uh, medical stuff, right? Um, but if you have someone that comes in and says, "Hey, this guy really helped me," you're giving validity that this helped, and they will seek that help. Because there's so many programs out there. I just had a vet that came from another program. It's a longer term program, which we don't have the beds for. It's similar in some aspects, but they have psychiatrists and everything. But he came back out. He's very positive, but nobody really knows about it. Like, how do I get that person in there? How do I connect that? And that's one of the things. And so I think the thing of the community, because when you get out, you're part of a unit, right? And then all of a sudden you're zero. And then it's hard to talk to people. Uh, you know, we're, vets are different. We have a different kind of humor and stuff like that. And then creating that area where they feel they can be themselves, right? And then the hyper focus, right? So and then physical, right? A lot of these activities aren't physical enough. So a lot of vets suffer from REM sleep. They don't sleep very well. I was one of them. I still am. They did a sleep study on me. I was sleeping sometimes 20 minutes a day. Um, and you can only sustain that so long. I mean, my CPAP was so bad, like my breathing. They were going to do surgery and do an implant that will electrically impulse so I could breathe at night. A lot of vets suffer from that. So so it's funny that I started this because it helped me, and then you start getting to the science, you start getting people reaching out to you, why does this work? And I think it's the self-reporting, the physical, the fact that they can make something, the fact that they develop this into small businesses too, that we've gone from hopelessness to thriving, and it depends on what level they want to take it. And then I would say easily over 80% of the guys that still come every Wednesday night for open forge that you came to, have forges at home, but they still come for that connection, right? They still are really into it. So it's amazing, what fire and steel can do. And it's also hands on, right? So that release, you might have a bad day and you just want to smash a metal. The next day, I have that at the forge. Someone will pick up something that someone had a bad day and they turn it into something beautiful. And that's what I'm very blessed to see this veteran that is out there, that raw piece of steel. You bring him in, you see the connections and you see them change. I mean, it's amazing.
We both, in the work of filming this series, work with every type of American experience and across so many different ways of living in this country. And I know you have created a space that allows you to network across all these other communities and places doing the work like that. Like, how has stepping into the arena allowed you to build a larger coalition and network with people who may live in a completely different part of the country from you, who may, have different demographics? Like, is there power in that collaboration for you?
What happens with the collaboration is that, most people, and we talked about how to start, we feel like we have a small voice. Like I did, like, am I going to make a difference? I don't know. That's, you start up and then all of a sudden you start collaborating, or someone that wants to do something similar to you, and you build on that, you build on that. And then what happens? The small voices become what we talked about, a roar. We're noticed. We're we're making our voices heard as a collaboration. And and that's the loudest part. You speak in volumes when we all come together. It's when you speak individually, you do feel like you have a small voice, and that's and people say, "Oh, I'm competing against the bigger nonprofits that have these big budgets." But if we come together and we're all trying to solve the same have a solution. And I've helped forges in England, and by just sharing information. I've helped another one in Australia by sharing our our outlines, our nonprofit, our mission, our guides for the teaching a class. I'm fortunate I have a background also in graphic design, so having those teaching things. Plus, I was a director at the Mid Atlantic Narcotics Training Academy, developed training for law enforcement, and so it kind of came second nature. But just sharing that information I had helps when I pick up the phone, open the door. I never know who's going to walk through that. Uh, obviously. And um, um, and and that's very humbling sometimes to see that you think about this. I started with one animal, you know, uh, basically a Harbor Freight grinder on steroids, and now I've grown, and also with that, it's just amazing. So the collaboration is really key. You might think that the person that is, I don't know, selling lemonade on the corner, that's an asset. You don't know, to come together and build your community. One of the things I always say about Black Horse Forge, we want to be good neighbors.
Well, one thing we often say is we're looking for the neighbors that we all wish we had, and you're certainly on that list. And the words that you've just used that I think probably matter most are sharing and connect and community. And look, the message to the people who are listening is we're living in the golden age of this. If you've got a neighbor like Steve, if you actually want to get into the business of magnifying something that's happening in your zip code that you give a damn about, you've got the tech, you've got the tools, you've got the platform. The, what we're doing is not that complicated. Now, we're doing it at a level that's a bit expensive, and that's a whole nother conversation we can have about sponsorships and patrons and all of that. But that's neither here nor there. The question is, how can you connect? How can you share? How can you spread the word? And how can you do it in a way that makes people laugh and cry at the same time?
People want to feel like their life has meaning and matters, and people want to be of service to each other. And sometimes that's being able to share a profit and to give them a platform to do that in a aligned and public way.
You want to move the needle, right?
Yeah.
Steve, I mean, you were on our show because you've moved the needle. You know, you were on our program because the first person you saved was yourself. You're the guy
Yeah.
in the plane and the masks come down. And, you got a big heart and you want to help everybody. But the first thing you do is you save yourself. And then you see what you can do for the guy next to you and the girl on the other side. And so it goes. And so that's the guts of what all of this is. It's on our side of it, it's just a new way to think about content, but it's also the oldest way in the world.
Yeah, I'm living proof that, I started small. I had my own issue and problem. I found my solution. I shared my solution. And then little behold, uh, my door opens and you guys walk through. And here I am. And that's the power of being humble and doing good work. It that's one thing that really helped the veterans too with your show. It really hit home how much they've reached and how much they've touched people and what a difference they've made. And until something like this really happens, it really strikes a chord with them. And even with your show, and I didn't let Sarah, any of this, and you've been in our space, we were able to double our space.
Well, you buried the lead, brother. Really?
Yep. We signed the lease. We're twice at the space. We've divided it now, and we've expanded that. We've expanded the leather machine. There's people that are on this. An old Marine paratrooper, believe it or not, he started a whole sewing business because of that machine. It's just, And now they're all excited. They're, I have these big burly guys wanting to sew. And that's a whole new aspect, right? And I don't know where that's gonna go, right? Here's something that we received from you and your show, and it's already like taking off and going in a whole new direction. And it's amazing. And then what's interesting, because I listen to them and they take off of these things, and I'm sure, give me another 90 days, you'll see, Black Horse Forge selling, as a because everybody has sewing machines, right? And everybody's grandma had a sewing machine or a treadle sewing machine. All of a sudden, that's the other thing. These guys are finding out about these hand crank sewing machines, and they want to fix them. They want to repair them. That's a whole nother aspect of it. They find these old things, they fix it, and then the next guy wants it, and they just give it to them. That's the whole cycle of life with this stuff.
Gorgeous
I
metaphor.
Yeah, I know we gotta go, but I'll tell you something that wasn't in the episode either that you didn't see. I damn near missed my plane that night because I couldn't get out of there because your guys kept coming up to me and gifting me these things that they had made in your forge by hand with tears in their eyes. And, at first I wasn't sure why is that happening? But I realized it's it's their need to share part of themselves too, and to be seen, and to physically make a thing that has your creativity and your sweat and your hope all baked into it, and then to hand it to another person. That matters on every
It
level.
does. It does. We're all capable of renewal. We can be rehabbed, and we do that in community, right? Healing happens in community. uh, Success happens in community, frankly, anything that's lasting. And I know everyone's going crazy for your episode, clearly, because it's hitting such a real nerve for people. So we're going to drop this in the chat for people to be able to watch this, watch your incredible episode as well.
I guess I really want to leave everybody with and stuff. And Roar came about from Sarah and I just having a conversation, and that means, military likes acronyms, and that means to rise, organize, act, and resound, have a voice, and do that together. You can make a difference. And another thing I just want to leave everybody, if this we're ending with something, is that if you're listening to us now and you've listened to the show, you've already made the first step to change your community. So I'm excited to see what people do. Share your story. Call me. I've had other people call and say, "Hey, I had a vet call about doing a nonprofit, doing surfboards and taking people surfing," and I talked them into, once again, being able to repeat it every day is to teach them how to shape surfboards, because you can do that anywhere, and that's the key. Being able to repeat that, and also, I remember early on, I'd have a class or something, and one person would show up, and that was just as important as when I have 40 people in a class. That's the deal. When it's slow, or you have to keep showing up, and people will be willing to do the same. And that's the key. Be part of something positive, part of something real. Because, like I said, when I started this, I thought I was just small and I didn't have a voice, and just turns out I needed to use it.
Steve, they broke the mold with you, brother. Thanks for doing
Truly.
what you're doing.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to being part of this, and I'm very blessed, to be part of this community that you've allowed me to be in, and just continue doing good work. Any way you can need me, I'm there, and my guys are there. So, and that goes for anybody. You know, if you need resources, call us. We're very resourceful.
We can attest to that. We can attest to that. Well, thank you so much. We're so grateful for this conversation. We're grateful for you and being a part of your network, and excited to build our network with all of you guys after as well. So please feel free to reach out to us too if you know other people like Steve or other organizations doing amazing things in their community, and some people that we think other people should know.
This process of our questioning really gave me a chance to build that trust.
Our differences are not something to be feared.
Somebody else is going through the same thing. We don't know all the answers, but together we can come up with an answer.
I mean, I want to be uncomfortable. That's what keeps life worth living.
I hope the initiative continues to grow, not just in our local area, but nationwide.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carla Canales, and I'm really excited to be with you today for a topic that is dear to my heart and an opportunity to learn from some incredible leaders. The challenges are different in each place, and sometimes the divisions are across race or class, sometimes across political beliefs, faith, or age. Yet most of us recognize our communities are stronger and healthier when people are connected. LB Prevette is a co-owner of Merle's Craft Cocktail. Located on Main Street in her hometown of Wilkesboro, North Carolina, LB is a fellow within the Aspen Institute, a member of her local planning board, and assistant coach of an undefeated middle school girls basketball team. LB frequently travels to speak on how we can cultivate communities of belonging. LB, you grew up on a chicken farm in Appalachia, North Carolina, and you often describe yourself as a lesbian hillbilly. What was that like?
Yeah, growing up in Appalachia, as we say here, was unique, for sure. I love so much about my childhood, and I really wouldn't trade the way I was raised for another. I don't think you can go back and unlearn things once you know them. So for me, only having a wood stove for heat was normal, or using deer instead of hamburger was normal. The turtle stew with a fire in the summer was normal. You know, everyone having their secret Coleman communion of muscadine wine from the back of the truck was normal. We were all Baptists, so you could never let anyone see you drink, but I've now know what was happening around that truck bed. It was a really tight-knit farming community. You know, we spent all of our time outside. We went to church 3 times a week, and I really didn't know there was anything different. But I did always feel outside of that knitting. Like I was never quite right, even as a little girl. Like I've always been big, I'm tall. I was the only brunette in my age group in the, youth at church. And I kind of felt this constant loneliness and just a longing that I wanted to feel as at home in the world as my neighbors seemed to. I love that world, and I wanted to be a part of it too. And as I got older, I found myself moving out west. Because it is hard being the only queer, or so I thought at the time, in a small town. And out west, I did find community. You know, I found a queer community at a different pace of life, but out there, I was also an outsider. As Jason Isbell sings, he has the line of everything I said was either funny or wrong. And I felt more like a caricature than a person. And it was kind of this realization that, yeah, I might be like 49% queer, but I'm unfortunately 51% hillbilly too. Or fortunately, as I see it now. And so that trope that we tell young queer kids, you've got to get out and get to the nearest big city, that wasn't going to work for me. I felt most at home in my mountains. So I came home to my mountains and decided that I just needed to spend my life helping to shape this to a place that myself and all the rest of my queer family can call home. Because there is so much to love about my place. It is my home.
That's such an incredible story, LB. Thank you for sharing that so vulnerably with us. Richard Young is the founder and executive director of Civic Lex, a nationally recognized nonprofit that strengthens civic health in Lexington, Kentucky. Over the past 7 years, Civic Lex has reshaped public meetings, boards, and commissions, developed a K-12 civics program, launched a newsroom covering local civic life, and more. He is also a founding steering committee member of the Kentucky Rural Urban Exchange.
Yeah, so Lexington is my hometown, and I grew up here, and have spent most of my life here. Um, I grew up in tons of different parts of the city. We moved constantly. I think we moved like 8 times before I graduated high school. At least it feels that way. And I never really felt a sense of connection or a sense of commitment to the place that I grew up in. I think, like LB said, a lot of folks in this part of the country, regardless of if you're in an urban community or a rural community, are taught when you're growing up that to be successful, you have to leave. And so I never thought that I would live in Lexington or in Kentucky. And I moved back home after school, and had the real fortune of getting involved in an organization called the Kentucky Rural Urban Exchange that brought folks together across rural and urban spaces in Kentucky for us to understand our sort of shared future of what it means, depending on no matter where you live in the state, that we have a sort of interlocked and shared future. And through that, I think really gained an understanding that I had a responsibility and that I should make a commitment to the place that I'm from and the place that I really care about. And it's really changed my relationship to Lexington, but to my family, to my friends. And out of that time, I built Civic Lex, which is designed, to help people solve challenges and problems in our community, to learn about civic life and how to get involved in local issues, and to really make their voice a part of our decision-making process here in Lexington. But I think for me, ultimately, what it's really about is like helping people feel a sense of agency in the place that they live here, right? That they matter to our community, that their perspective and experiences are really important, and that there are folks that might think differently or might think the same that live right next door to them that can help them address, the challenges that they see together here in Lexington. And I think ultimately that's one of the things that we're missing so much in our world today is a sense of agency over our lives. And we're working to help folks find here in Lexington.
Well, it sounds like you're doing just that, Richard, and your commitment to that sense of responsibility and agency, I think, is also shared by our third guest today, Shamichael. Originally from Margaret, Alabama, a town of fewer than 1,000 people when he left for college, Shamichael is a pastor turned librarian, author, and advocate for the power of public space. He travels the U.S. and beyond, speaking about the role of libraries in strengthening community life. He led the renovation of Memphis's historic Cosset Library, a project that helped earn Memphis Public Libraries national recognition as the most innovative library system in the country.
Well, I deeply resonate with the stories of LB. That small town experience, the thing that I learned the most, or that I recognized very early, was the power of place in that community. Where I most often saw people together was the park or the church, right? These were the fall festivals. These were the Mother's Day celebrations where people, regardless of if they were even Christian or not, actually just generally show up, for the Mother's Day celebration or for the fall festival. And that, was really transformative for me to recognize that regardless of backgrounds or belief systems, that there were these places in every community that at least had the potential to bring people together. It was a fascinating thing for me. And so I've been in the world of public libraries now for almost a decade, as you mentioned, for a period of time, helping lead the renovation of the Cosset Library in Memphis, Tennessee. And I didn't necessarily have a library background, and what that compelled me to do was to literally get on the phone. I would go to library websites across the country, find their phone number and call, hope someone would answer the phone and say, "Hey, can I ask you about how you're running your library? Can you tell me what are the things that you're doing that are making it more welcoming and inclusive?" And of course that became the subject of a book and lots of writing that I've done. And since in my role with my organization that I work for now called the Urban Libraries Council, we are an action tank, an association of nearly 200 libraries across North America. The work continues to understand what are the things that public libraries do that stitch and bring their communities together.
I love that you use that term stitch. It's so apropos of what we're discussing today, and of course, of weave. In your community, Shemichael, what does it take to gather people across differences, particularly when we're looking at a moment where there are such significant divides in belief systems? I'm curious, how do you create gathering places in your community?
Yeah, I really reflect on my time at the Memphis Public Library system, at the Constant Branch and beyond. What we learned very quickly was the power of shared experience. That if you could bring people together to do some sort of activity, whether it was sewing or knitting, coding, learning a new recipe swapping, that these were the moments that had the potential to bring people together. And so the goal for us was to figure out, hey, what are the many different ways that we could take any one event and try to make sure that it reached a broad range of people? How could we talk about events in a way that would really resonate with folks? What were the different ways that we could do the program inside, outside, at different times of the day, weekends, right? And just so that we could make sure that we would hit a large audience. But I do believe that it is shared experience that can really truly bring our communities together.
Thank you so much for that. And I want to turn back to LB now with that same question and your background and all of the faceted hats that you wear. I'm curious to hear, what has your experience been like in creating gathering places in your community?
Yeah, I think when it comes to creating gathering places, having a bar helps for sure. That makes a pretty easy place to get
I'm
folks
glad you
together.
brought that one up.
Right. But I think um, in my life, I think I've really been shocked at how easy it is to gather people and to have the kind of community I used to long for. I was really afraid that I was going to look like an idiot trying to befriend someone. Like I was afraid to talk to people or afraid to try to have the event or do anything. And when I started doing it, I kind of was met with a yes, like every time, because people we're all lonely and longing to feel more connected with each other and looking to be that kind of invited. And when it comes to expanding that into a group, I think people often overlook how much thought goes into those things. Like community doesn't just happen. Like Michael was saying, there's a lot of preparation. What do I want to get from this? What am I trying to do? And I present on the idea kind of a fair bit around how do we cultivate this? And I think it's so unique, to place. Where are you? What is the community you're serving? You guys have to determine what is comfortable, what is safe, what feels like home to us. And with that being said, I kind of have 4 principles that I use to kind of guide when I'm trying to build community. And one, our community connections. And the first being authenticity. The more comfortable I am being myself, the more comfortable others are showing me themselves, the more we figure out our best gifts to the community, how we can best connect and serve. I love ritual and initiation, and not in a weird way, but having dumb handshakes with your friends, and having this kind of structure almost to things. I think structure liberates. And I think the big key is it's not gate kept. We have these rituals, but we share them freely with each other. We want to pull you into also having these fun little rituals around. And just kind of knowing what to expect helps people show up. It removes my anxiety of what's going to happen. I can now just show up and go to an event. I was talking about shared values, and that doesn't necessarily, of course, have to be in the traditional faith systems, but more do we have a shared language when we say good neighbor? Do we have a shared language when we say community? Do we understand what we're talking about in a way that we can talk about our values? Are we able to, define those things so that we know how to both show up for each other and to protect our community from bad actors, that maybe don't have those values? And the last one being temple. Where do you gather? It can be a park. It can be the library. I am libraries forever. Get out there and take care of your local libraries. Coffee shops, the disc golf course. It's the parking attendant you see every day because you're on the same street. Temple is both a physical space that you can gather, and it's this understanding that this is a space where all the other things are true. It's not just that we gather here. It's when we gather here, this is the things we believe and what we want to do. And so it's kind of one of those like, I don't know, I'll say when it comes to community, ask. You'd be shocked at how many people would love to have a coffee with you. And when you want to expand it, just, kind of, I follow those four to make sure that I'm on the same page for that event with all the participants that I'm asking to join.
What a great roadmap you've given us there, Albie. That's fantastic. I'm taking notes. And I want to turn now and just see, Richard, if you have anything that you could offer us in terms of how to create gathering places and how you've done that in your community.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think much can build on what LB just shared and what Schmeichel's been talking about. I think, a lot of our work focuses around, how do we take some of these like tough and thorny civic issues that are, impacting people's lives in like small and annoying ways, like traffic, to like pretty big ways, like lack of affordable housing and housing availability in our community. And I think, a big part of our work is helping people understand that their participation actually can mean something, right? That like getting involved and building relationships. One of the sort of you asked earlier about like what does it take to gather people across difference? One of the differences that we focus on, probably the difference we focus on the most, is different levels of civic power, right? Like everyday folks and people that make decisions in our community, be they elected leaders or city staff, but people that have like a pretty heavy decision-making authority. And I think to do that, we have to show yes, that like getting involved in this process matters, right? That you could actually have some sort of eventual impact on the result. But to make a space, I think, in which people feel comfortable, you kind of have to neutralize that power dynamic, right? So I think for us, that means like not putting decision makers up on a pedestal, right? That helping them understand that the expertise of folks in our community might look very different than their expertise, but it's also really important, right? Folks have a sense of a deep sense of knowledge of what it means to live in a place and what it means to experience that place. And we have to make sure that we're doing work to sort of neutralize what would otherwise be a pretty significant dividing line. And I think that takes, hospitality, that takes making people feel comfortable. It takes demystifying things, right? To LB's point about ritual, right? That we're not gatekeeping it. I think the same is for information and knowledge, right? Like, everyone might not have a thorough understanding about our city's zone changing process. So how can we sort of neutralize that and make sure that everyone's coming into these sorts of conversations about community issues on a level playing field where they don't feel excluded from the conversations?
Richard, I want to stick to that point and your experience. How has your experience been working with people on that shared goal, particularly when there have been differences among the constituents that were working together?
Yeah, I mean, I think, everyone, I feel like in this like field of community building, or however you want to talk about it, right? I think we often instrumentalize a lot of this stuff, right? In terms of like shared goals and that sort of thing. And I think like, I don't think people go into it thinking that way, right? People go into sort of building a relationship with like a concern or some sort of common concern, right? Like people, again, sort of everyone has a sense of expertise and deep knowledge over the issues that are impacting their lives, right? They know what it means to be able to not find housing that they can afford. They know what it means to be able to not get from one place to another because of inadequate public transportation system. So people are coming in not necessarily with a shared goal, but with an understanding that others can relate to, right? In some form or fashion. I think a lot of the issues that impact our community or impact anyone's community are commonly held. We experience them differently, but we all sort of commonly hold them. And so, when it comes to sort of working on that goal together, I think the important thing is that you can't sort of put that period of working together as the sort of only part of the relationship, right? You have to do a ton of work to help people build relationships before they can work on a common goal together. You have to create spaces which people can sort of casually encounter each other, right? I mean, I think a library is a perfect example of that, where people are just sort of casually meeting each other over time, right? And you start to build up those points of connection. or a bar, right? Like to LB's point, right? Like a place where people go and see each other time after time and can start slowly building relationship over time. And then when you're, working on a shared goal, you have a sort of common, some common links, a common understanding of what's happening in your community, but also this pre-existing relationship that may not be flourishing, but the seeds have been planted. Uh, and then after you've worked on something together, you also have to continue to nurture that relationship, right? Otherwise, it feels transactional. It feels like, all right, well, you helped me with this issue. The thing that I care about is, addressed, or we've, done our piece on it. I'm going to go back to just like sitting in my house by myself. So I think we have to understand that relationship building can't just be it has to be like not just the end, but also the means and the purpose, right? Like it has to be the thing that's kind of going constantly. Relationships can help you do things, but they're also the point in and of themselves. And I think particularly when you're trying to address community issues, especially when you're talking about different levels of civic power, the continuity of those relationships is incredibly important.
That's so beautifully said. And again, I'm taking lots of notes here. You're giving us really a guide for this work. Thank you so much. Turning back to LB now. LB, how have folks engaged in ways you didn't expect? I'm curious, have you created a friendship that you found to be unexpected or unusual? I know that you have mentioned the power of mountain storytellers to me, so I'm hoping you have a story to share about this.
You know, maybe, but it's almost that like I don't find any friendships unexpected anymore. That is a part of being like we talked about, mountain storytellers that love our idioms and entertainment. Like I can make friends with a stop sign, given enough time. Um, but I think what I find so shocking is the level of friendship that I feel with folks. It's not small talk. It's not catching up. It's not, that we just pass each other and are cordial. Like I have a genuine joy. I'm at your house for dinner. I'm lifting in your gym of folks who are completely across the political spectrum of me. And I do love them. And they're over there because I love them. And I do understand them. Uh, Even if I don't agree with their logic, even if I condemn a lot of their political stances, and I don't shy away from naming the harm those beliefs cause to me and my other beloveds throughout the world, but also can't stop loving those people. Um, if I had done that growing up, I wouldn't have had anybody, you know? And so it's one of these, like when you have these friendships, they can't be just because I want to have a token different friend. And you can't shy away from the hard conversation with them, but you also can't like put them on a surface level. You got to actually love them. And I know, and I firmly believe, and I've seen it, that people can learn to love me in my town. And what I'm hoping is that if I can continue to bear the weight of the unloving long enough, they will learn to love and protect me and stand up for me, where it goes beyond people just loving how they feel when they have a charming friend at the bar telling them a story to like, I care about that person as a like being who deserves the rights. And if they don't, maybe their kids do. You know what I mean? If they never come around, maybe having the queer aunties, like their kids come around. It's doing the work of like, I'm not going to see it today. I'm not going to see it tomorrow because I'm not setting goals with my friends. I'm just trying to love my friends and love them in a really honest and open and candid way and see what comes from that.
Oh, Albie, that's so beautifully said. And I really appreciate that you use this word love, which is often stigmatized or even taboo in discussions. But removing that stigma and really using it for what it stands for in the way you just described is just so powerful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Very inspiring. And Shamichael, I have a question for you. Going back to your work with libraries are a unique cornerstone in communities in that they're rooted locally, yet they're also connected to other larger networks, right? So, how do you see, or how are you seeing the impact of weaving in local libraries funnel up to the larger scale change at the regional or even national level?
Yeah, well, just in my personal experience, as I go back to Memphis, that Memphis story,
Mhm.
we really work to gather people over in all sorts of ways. Of course, around books, because I think that's where most people's minds go when they think about libraries. They think about books, and of course, all of the book clubs and opportunities to create connections over ideas is always important. But in my library, we quickly expanded beyond books and went to, a monthly music series in the library's courtyard. We did a monthly dance session that actually featured this really fancy LED dance floor, and people just came out and hung out and had a lot of fun with that. We used micro grants and went to the community, kind of as Richard said, and really employed people. Hey, come and use this space how you'd want to use it. And one of the things that came out of that was an event that was organized by a number of women in the community, and there was a yoga instructor outside. There was a DJ inside the library of all things, right? A painter, a fire thrower, and what my team and I learned during that process that is, I think, what so many libraries do well is, these occasional one-off events that are really, really novel that didn't lead to opportunities to do these longer events, these book clubs, these story times that last over weeks or over months. And in the process there, you really, really see relationships not only form, but also solidify. And the work that I do now, we really are for the last couple of years now, we have been doing a library bridge building project. And there are literally hundreds of libraries now who are part of this network of small, medium, large libraries where we're asking ourselves and sort of exchanging practices of like, hey, what are you doing that's really working in your community? What can I learn from that? And we believe that, small urban, small rural libraries can learn a lot from what the urban folks are doing, but we think the urban folks can learn a ton about what the rural folks are doing. So I think a lot of this sort of knowledge exchange between libraries of different sizes and being in different geographic parts of the country is what I'm most excited about right now.
Oh, that's so exciting. I mean, I'm also just thinking about the artist in residence program that you started and all of this innovation and the opportunity for that knowledge exchange. Sounds like the sky is the limit in what we can learn from each other. So, just taking all of this in, I'm energized and inspired by the three of you so much. I'm wondering for myself and maybe others watching, what would be one piece of advice that you could offer someone who wants to get involved in weaving in their community? Maybe based on your experiences. Schmeichel, I'm going to turn to you first. What would be that one piece of advice that you could offer?
Start small. Start with what you have. One of my most favorite stories comes from North Liberty, Iowa. There's a library there led by a woman named Jenny Gardner, who have for the last 15 years has been doing in the library a program that started as sociable seniors and now has become a Monday morning coffee club. And it is really incredible to see how this coffee club each and every week has transformed from 10 folks who used to show up now to sometimes 50 folks who show up and just have coffee and talk about the news and check in on each other. And that really started with nothing fancy, no big equipment, nothing really, no huge investment, just using what she had and breaking out coffee opened up the opportunity to bring her community together in some really interesting ways.
Thank you so much for that. That's really inspiring. And Richard, I'm going to turn to you next, and then what about for you? What would be one piece of advice that you could offer someone who wants to get involved in weaving in their community?
Yeah, so I would say I'm gonna say two things. I'm so sorry. The first one is like very baseline, just like talk to your neighbors for like a little longer than you normally do, right? Like I think we all like engage with our neighbors, like, oh hey, how's it going? But like just take that conversation just like maybe 10 more seconds. Maybe ask a second question or a third question. Um, but but I think the other thing that I'd like to say is, uh, especially in this like in the time that we're in, I think it's really important to like reach out and talk to the people that represent you at the local level, right? Whether or not you're your council members or county commission or even just people that work in local government, and don't reach out to them to sort of berate them, or don't reach out to them to sort of necessarily take them on a specific issue. But I think just like reach out and build a relationship with folks that work for you in your community, right? A lot of times we sort of imagine government and imagine representation as a machine that's separate from us, but the folks that are in these positions are humans and are people, and like reach out and just like ask them to coffee. They'll probably say yes. Try and find an opportunity to just strike up a conversation. And it doesn't have to be about solving a problem. It can just be about getting to know them. But when you do have a problem, it's going to be a lot easier to have that conversation if you're starting from something that's more than zero.
That's such great advice. And I'm also seeing a theme here of coffee, um, which is always a good thing. But just this idea of really building the relationships, I'm hearing how important that's been in your work, Richard. Thank you. And LB, the same question to you. What would be a piece of advice you could offer?
Yeah, I think I would have to echo uh, these guys here on just start. Like no matter what it is, like just start. And when I uh, listened to Shmichael and Richard talk about their work, and I was like, wow, I don't do anything like that. Like I do just like hang out with folks, and then them gathering sends them to go do the work, right? Like you create the vessel, then they go do, twerk can look a million different ways. Like it can, whatever it means to connect can be any way. And just start. I think like it's the best advice that just, again, if you have a person you're like, I've wondered, like I'd like to be their friend, ask them for a coffee, ask them to go on a walk, and just don't be afraid to. Everything I do, I always say I've been stumbling forward for like 7 years now. I was like, I didn't plan on doing any of this. I just knew I wanted to be here and I wanted to live in a town with good neighbors. So I guess I should start being a really good neighbor. Because no one's gonna start if you don't. So yeah.
So, I mean, it's incredible to see how each of you have really embodied the concept of being the change you want to see in the world. And often with your personal stories, finding ways to reconnect with your communities. It's just been so inspiring to hear how you have really taken that advice that you're offering and you're walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And it feels to me that there is a maybe unnamed army of compassion, if I could say so. Wishing you all the best in the work that you're doing. And I'm sure that this conversation has inspired others to follow in your example.
Hey, folks, it's me, Rain, again. All of these conversations have got me thinking. When we think about spiritual growth and transformation, we think about it oftentimes on a personal level, like I'm going to focus on my prayer and my meditation and kind of making myself a better person. And that is super, super important, right? But I had the great opportunity last year to go meet with the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala in northern India with all the Tibetan refugees. And I got to meet one of his right-hand Tibetan monks. And basically, he said that the meaning of life is service to others, and that this is a spiritual charge because we're going to make the world a better place. We're not going to focus on ourselves so much. We're going to be, instead of being self-centered, we're going to be other-centered. And guess what? There's this crazy dichotomy that the Western world sometimes forgets or ignores, that it is in helping others that we feel a much deeper well-being and satisfaction. So our charge is twofold: to look inside with prayer and meditation and personal work, and to be of service to other folks. And that's what these conversations have gotten me thinking about. But back to the task at hand. Today, we're talking about that second path: healing our communities, bringing people together, being of service. Whatever community we live in, whatever our background, our preferences, whichever political party we support, we all know in our gut that this moment in our history carries some really big risks. Many people are hurting and they feel left out of the economy. Technology is changing the job market and displacing people. Mental health, especially among our young folk, is at an all-time low. We haven't tackled prejudice, racism, sexism, and poverty. We face more extreme weather and a changing climate. The world around us is awash with tensions and conflicts. Our own communities and sometimes even our families are divided. So, as we approach America's 250th anniversary, many wonder if we will continue to be a light to the world. I believe we can be, but only if we are united and learn again to care for each other. Connected communities are strong and resilient. Strong communities make up a strong nation. We've heard today about a quiet revolution of people bringing neighbors together to solve problems, build relationships, and create communities where all can thrive. Americans have come together before in turbulent times, and we can do it again. But we must weave a strong new social fabric that includes everyone and will carry us through our next 250 years. Our politicians can't do that. We have to, starting where we live and work. We've heard from people who are showing up for neighbors, so let's join them. Make sure to visit the link that we've been sharing, shareouramerica.org/now. Become a weaver in your community, or if you're already weaving, go a step deeper. Continue to look around for the stories of hope. They're all over the place. Join the new American Revolution. It's a lot quieter than the last one, and it lacks three-cornered hats. But it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun, and I'll see you there. I want to thank our presenters, the Belfer Center for Innovation and Social Impact at the 92nd Street Y, and the Aspen Institute's Weave the Social Fabric Project. Thank you also to our media sponsor, USA Today. But the most important thanks goes to you who are watching. Thank you for showing up for your country today by listening in.